Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to each one of you to this event, The Making of New India. In fact, this event is brought to you by WMG in collaboration with MCA Consulting. MCA Consulting is one of the fastest growing company with a mission to progress human ingenuity through distinctive work culture, contributing to knowledge furtherance. It is working with a vision to significantly contribute towards growth and governance of mid to large organizations and funded startups. WMG Elite is a flagship initiative of WMG Group exclusively for CFOs of Bangalore-based companies. And today, it has got close to 700 odd active members. Today, my heart fills with joy when I see close to 400 of you here attending this event, trying to understand what future holds for this country and the changing paradigm of governance. In fact, if you look at our country, there have been prime ministers, close to 15 prime ministers, and all of them have come from different backgrounds, diverse backgrounds. As much as some of the prime ministers were politicians, some of them were economists, some of them were pilots, poets, and in an unprecedented event, we have today a prime minister who is also a spiritualist. Today, we have Sadhguru Sri Madhusudan Swamiji here, and he is going to unravel what in the minds of a spiritualist who is there at the helm of this country, and what into the minds of this gentleman that makes the country ticking. And in fact, we also, Swamiji, for that matter, firmly believes in how Sarkar, the government, the Samaj, the society, and the Sansthan, the institution, coming together can achieve anything is what Sadhguru feels. And so therefore, on this august occasion, I, on behalf of WMG, MCA Consulting, and on behalf of each one of you here, extend hearty welcome to you, Swamiji. Today, we are fortunate today to have Ridham Desai along with us. And Mr. Desai, today we would look forward to hear from you nuances of Indian economics, Indian economy, and how the market, impact of the markets, and what in your view that holds, that is in store for this country. We are all eager to listen to you, and a hearty welcome to you, Mr. Ridham. In fact, if you look at a person who advocates for the policies of the government to ensure that, policies are set up to progress the human ingenuity. And these policies are in line with nation building. And he also believes that the government, Sarkar, the society, the Samaj, and the Bazaar, these are the three aspects he feels are the things that are required to build this Naya Bharat. And I, on behalf of each one of you here, extend hearty welcome to Dr. R. Balasubramanian. Heroes are a breed apart. They defy the limits. They challenge the equilibrium. When the entire nation had its head down during Satyam fiasco, this man, on the call of the nation, took the responsibility of reviving a company from imminent collapse to a marvelous recovery. A person for whose efforts the government aptly conferred Padma Shri Award in 2009. And I'm sure most of us sitting here would relate with him as our guru for income tax purposes, right? And the person is none other than Mr. T.N. Manoharan. And we welcome heartily Mr. Manoharan. And we also have amidst us a special invitee, former cricketer Robin Singh. We welcome you, Robin Singh, to this. And last but not the least, each one of you are here, and which has made this program so beautiful. And from the bottom of my heart, and on behalf of WMG and MCA Consulting, hearty welcome to each one of you. Thank you. Maybe go with AV. Video.
Institutions offer services to the family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is the only way to make the world better here and now, says Sadhguru Sri Madhusudan Sai, a humanitarian, a visionary, a social and spiritual leader who has established several institutions of public service in the last 10 years since 2012. These institutions offer services to the most needy in the fields of nutrition, education, healthcare and social care in about 33 countries, absolutely free of all costs.
Nutrition. The Annapurna Morning Nutrition Program serves healthy morning nutrition to more than 3 million school-going children in India and about 5,000 children in 5 other countries overseas.
Eradicating hidden hunger is one of the main goals of Annapurna, and hence a customized micronutrient-rich supplement, Sai Ishwar, is served to children every morning to ensure better attendance and a healthy childhood devoid of wasting or stunting. Education.
A practical testimony to implementing the ancient way of education that is based on the molding of wholesome individuals with brilliant heads, compassionate hearts, and competent hands, the 3H formula, is the Sri Satyasai Lokaseva Gurukulam group of institutions. These institutions impart integral values-based education to over 5,000 students, both boys and girls, from grade 6 to doctorate programs over 27 campuses in India and at 3 institutions outside India in Australia, Laos, and Nigeria, completely free of all costs. The higher education wing is the Sri Satyasai University for Human Excellence, an institution which empowers young students with the necessary knowledge, skills, and character with only one purpose: serving the society.
The university is also the only general university that offers courses in fine arts and Vedic and spiritual studies.
On the July 3rd, 2023, the Sri Satyasai University for Human Excellence celebrated its second convocation. Srimati Draupadi Murmu, the Honorable President of India, presided over the convocation and gave away gold medals to 17 students and conferred honorary doctorates to 5 eminent individuals. About 50% of these students are first-generation graduates, and about 66% hail from below poverty line.
A milestone that will change the future of medical education in India was accomplished by the Sri Satya Sai University for Human Excellence by the setting up of India's first totally free medical college, Sri Madhusudan Sai Institute of Medical Sciences and Research. The college was inaugurated by the Honorable Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi, on 25th March 2023.
Healthcare. Sri Satyasai Sanjeevani Centers for Child Heart Care are the world's largest chain of pediatric cardiac hospitals without billing counters for addressing the global burden of congenital heart diseases. 5 child heart care centers in India at the states of Chhattisgarh, Haryana, Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Telangana. 5 healthcare centers in the countries of Fiji, Sri Lanka, USA, and 2 facilities in Nigeria offer completely free of cost services to all.
At the Sanjeevani hospitals in India, more than 25,000 little hearts have been treated through invasive and non-invasive procedures. Outpatient consultations and screenings have also been performed for over 430,800 children.
Sri Satya Sai Sarala Memorial Hospital is a multidisciplinary facility at Karnataka with a high dependency inpatient unit providing services to the rural and underprivileged sections of the society. Over 1,000 outpatients and 300 inpatients are taken care every single day.
Yet another free healthcare initiative is the Sai Swasthya Wellness Centers, which are being set up in the rural hinterlands of India. In the next 10 years, more than 6,000 centers will be set up across the country to take this triple elixir of nutrition, education, and healthcare to the doorsteps of children is a saga of love and service, as several lives are being illumined through these benevolent acts every single day.
Selfless service personified. Sri Sadguru Sri Madhusudan Sai, a revered spiritual leader. Sadguru firmly believes in providing free healthcare, education, and nutrition to the undernourished children's, underprivileged children's. His principle for providing free food, education, and nutrition they are the basic necessities of life. And according to him, and as we know as well, that from ancient times, the Gurukul that we have in our system never charged a fee for a person who's studying in that Gurukul. Maybe he is a son of an emperor or that of a soldier. And of course, because of which, there is a kind of a gratitude that these students develop towards society. True to his belief, he has today 15 hospitals globally and 37 educational institutions. And the organization feeds over 3 million school children daily, globally. Reverence to you, Sadhguru, and request you to adorn the suite, please. And Seeker or Madan, please escort Sadhguru to the dais. Request you to address us, Sadhguru.
As they say, actions speak louder than words. I think you have seen a lot of action in the video, and I thank this group, WMG, for providing us with an opportunity to showcase the work that is being done across 30 countries, especially most of the work is in India. So first and foremost, on behalf of our organization and on behalf of all the selfless volunteers, staff, and the beneficiaries of all these projects, I convey our grateful thanks to WMG Group for providing us with this opportunity, and I stand on behalf of all those 3,000 odd staff and millions of beneficiaries to talk to you. In a forum like this, where there are CFOs discussing where the country is heading and what should be the strategy for further growth and expansion, and as we all know, we have a target of $5 trillion in no time, actually, and then maybe 10 trillion, and by the time we are in the 100th year of independence, we want to be a $30 trillion economy or maybe surpass that. So long way ahead and a lot of work to do, and in this forum, talking about service activities may sound like out of place, but as I speak to you, I will try to help you understand that how it is not out of place, but it is actually what we all have to do together in order to achieve that $30 trillion dream by the 100th year of independence, and how that can be achieved only when we all come together. That's more or less going to be my talk all about. Building a new India. As we all know, India is the most ancient land, most ancient civilization in the whole of the world. And we are proud residents of this country, which has been there almost forever. Though recorded history only puts us on the dateline for maybe 5,000 years ago or something like that, but unrecorded history of our spiritual scriptures take us back to more than 10 to 15,000 years ago. That's as far as we can see from here today, but I'm sure we are older than that. We are the smartest race on earth. At the same time, we are the most spiritual race on earth. And that's the uniqueness of being Indians. We are modern, yet we are ancient. And when we think of building the new India, especially in this Amrit Kal of the next 25 years, it's about building a new India on the ancient principles of our spiritual heritage. And this is what I wanted to bring to your notice. Now, this is our opportunity, a moment that we must seize to do it right this time. In the last 100 years, as we have seen, several countries have come out of poverty. They have progressed. Many of them are developed nations, the first world. But have they done it right is the question that we all must ask. Is there something that we can learn from what has happened so far and build an India, and the new India, a little differently from the other countries who have only focused on economic progress, leaving a lot of other social and cultural aspects, especially spiritual aspects, behind? So we, being a nation which was founded on the principles of spirituality, oneness of everything and everyone, and the prayer as it goes, I often quote that, Sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkham apnuyat. Look at the magnanimity of this prayer, which says, let everyone be happy and healthy. May no one have any sorrow whatsoever. May everyone see auspiciousness and good everywhere. That is the prayer. We did not pray for just ourselves or our company or our country. We prayed for the entire humanity. We said, may everyone, that includes birds, beasts, as I was told, WMG is also very actively involved with wildlife preservation, conservation. So everybody is included in that. The trees, the birds, the beasts, the mountains, the rivers, the entire environment, the ecosystem, the atmosphere, everything and everyone is included in this happiness, which we always dreamt of. And so when we build the new India that we are all talking about, will this India be the India that our ancients had thought about, dreamt of, and prayed for? Or will this just be another economic growth engine for the rest of the world? Is a question that we must ask and accordingly take the next steps. So doing it right this time is the most important thing, and also show the world how it is done. Few centuries ago, India contributed to a quarter of the world's GDP is what I was told. Today, maybe 3%, 4% of the world's GDP. And world's GDP stands as $100 trillion and even increasing, growing by 2-3% every year. Yet, at the same time, there are 700 to 800 million people in the world who go to bed hungry. And that is the kind of growth that we have achieved in the past 1 century or so, where we have become a $100 trillion GDP. At the same time, we have left behind 100 million people to starve. Is this the right kind of growth? Is this the new kind of world order that we want to create? Will India be the leading force in creating the new paradigm, especially in the global south? Is something that we all as influencers, as shakers and movers in the society must ask ourselves. And the answers to all these questions lie in our ancient Indian ideals of considering everybody as ours. As the G20 presidency is with India this year, and the motto is so wonderful. They borrowed it from very ancient Upanishadic idea, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, Maha Upanishad. It says, Ayam nijaha parovetti gadana lagu chetasam udara charitanam tu Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. To consider these people as ours and those as others is the way of the narrow-minded ones, the selfish ones. But for the broad-minded people, the entire world is one family. And from there, we too have borrowed our inspiration when we defined our mission for the whole world as one world, one family. The moment you think of the world as a family, the whole attitude towards everyone around you changes. Suddenly you feel more compassion, more kindness, more camaraderie, more fraternity, more connection with each other. And then we are willing to do whatever is in our might to help each other because we are a family. And that is the idea with which our Honorable Prime Minister has defined the G20 for this year. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. I don't think in the history of G20 summits ever anybody thought of an idea as beautiful as this. That whole world is our family and India has to show the way. As I keep talking to different people from different sectors, I keep telling them, we don't have to do anything. We just have to go back to our ancient roots. And all the new shoots that appear will be right. Mahatma Gandhi was once asked, by a journalist, an impatient journalist who said, I do not have all the time in the world to listen to your entire discourse. Please tell me about your philosophy in just 3 words. And Mahatma Gandhi summarized it from one of the Upanishadic thought, from Isha Upanishad. And he said, Tena tyaktena bunjita. Tena tyaktena bunjita. Sacrifice and enjoy. Not enjoy and then sacrifice. He simply said sacrifice and then enjoy. What does that mean? This again is a very ancient Indian idol, and I tell in every forum, this is the solution to all the problems of the world. Consume, but with a sense of sacrifice. Consume only as much as you need and not as much as you want. Principles of economics, resources are scarce and our wants are unlimited. With limited resources, we want to achieve unlimited wants, and that's why we need economics and all of you. But the truth is that our Indian ancient principles said, just take as much as you need and leave the rest. Even if you have earned it rightfully, it does not belong to you. In fact, the whole shloka says, Ishavasyam idam sarvam yatkinchat jagatyam jagata tena tyaktena bhunjitha ma grudha kasyas vidhanam. Which means the whole world is permeated by the same divine force. Everybody is equal in that divinity. So how do we behave when we know that we are all equal in some way? Forget about divinity. Even otherwise we are equal. We feel the same hunger. We feel the same sleep. We feel the same sadness. And with COVID, we all have felt the same pain and suffering. COVID was a great leveler, I must say. It has taught us some very important lessons for us as humanity. So we are all equal in so many ways. So when we know we are equal in so many ways, how are we to behave in this world? What are we supposed to do? And it says, Tena tyaktena bunjita. Therefore, consume, but with a sense of sacrifice. Think of others as well who do not have the same privileges and opportunities as us. And the last part of the shloka is even more beautiful. And that connects us all, that connects economics with spirituality, with social service, with governance and everything. And that says, Ma grudha kasyas vidhanam. Don't take another person's wealth. Which means don't steal another person's belongings. And you would say, who would do that? That's crime. And legal system is there around. We would be caught. But it is much deeper than that. It says, whatever is not needed by you, it does not belong to you. We would say, I have earned it rightfully. I own it because of my efforts. And therefore, I am the owner of it. It belongs to me. But our scriptures say, no, not at all. If you don't need it, even if you have earned it rightfully, it does not belong to you. It belongs to somebody whose need is greater than yours. Imagine if this principle was applied. All these ideas of equality, inclusivity, and prosperity for all, equitable growth, all these would have been realized by now. If only we thought that all that which we do not need, truly we do not need to have it. It belongs to somebody whose need is greater than ours. So what if we have rightfully earned it? So that is the idea of Ma grudha kasyas vidhanam. On one side, we have people who have excess wealth. On the other side, we have people who have absolutely nothing. They don't even know how they are going to get the next meal of the day. And I work at the grassroots level with our wonderful team across 25 states and 4 union territories in India and across close to 33 countries around the world. And we know the problems are same. There are developed nations, but they have another side of theirs which they don't showcase, but the problem is same. There are children who go uneducated, they don't go to school, there are women who do not get opportunities, they are hungry, they're malnourished, there are conflicts and there are issues, social issues, there is injustice, name it. All problems exist under the shadow of all the prosperous nations. But we tend to ignore it. So they have built these nations on these principles of pure economics, pure capitalism. But as India, it's our time to build the new India in a different way, do it better than them, not because we can grow faster than them, not because our GDP or per capita will be more than theirs, but simply because in our country, this dream of let everybody be happy, may everybody be prosperous, may everybody be healthy will be realized, which has not been realized in any of the developed nations of the world as of now. And this is our opportunity, this is our moment to seize. And how do we all connect? And I say that if you draw a grid, an x-axis and a y-axis, and you put giving on the x-axis and taking on the y-axis. Now all life is give and take, as we all know. You put them on two axes and then you'll find four kinds of people in the world. One, who give less and take also less. They're called minimalists. No, they do not want to take too much, but they also do not want to give too much. They survive with limited means. And that's actually gathering momentum with the new generation. They don't want to buy cars, they don't want to buy houses, they're okay with leasing and hiring and renting. They do not want to accumulate hoard. This is a new generation. The millennials think differently. And Gen Z is even different than them. So they are these minimalists. They'll do least damage to the society and also they take less from people. But they do not also help in a big way. They just do their part very little. Then the other quadrant would be those who take as much as they give. They just want to give as much as they take. They do not want to do more than that. They just want to do their duty, perform their social obligations. I call them socialists. Now, they take and they give, but that's equal. They don't do more than their might. And that's also a part of the world. Many countries follow that philosophy, and that's fine too. But I have not seen success in those philosophies as well. We have been to countries which follow socialism or communism or whichever way. But I haven't seen happiness and equality over there as well. Then we have the third quadrant of those who give more and take less. They always contribute more back to the society compared to what they have taken from the society in terms of resources. And these people are called spiritualists, who always try to find out how we can give more than what we take from the society. And that's the idea of sustainability. Whenever you give more than what you take, naturally your resources will be sustainable. And the fourth quadrant, I don't have to tell you who they are. They take more and give less. And I do not want to name that East. But they exist, and they exist in a big number. And that's why all the disparity. The biggest challenge that the world is facing today is social polarization. And not religious polarization, social polarization, which means there are haves and there are have-nots, and they are at the two ends of this great chasm of inequality. And this will lead to social unrest. This will lead to many other issues, governance issues, social issues, geopolitical issues, not because of any ideology, or religious or other. People are fed up and they're tired of religious ideologies. Wars happened earlier for that reason, but not anymore. Today wars will happen because people will claim what they think rightfully is their right, and which has been denied because they have been denied because of the people who hold positions of authority and power. And that is the kind of unrest that we are going to face in the coming times. So how will businesses operate in an environment which is so volatile? It's already a VUCA world, as we say. Add social polarization to it, and you have the recipe for sure, short disaster. And that is the world that we are heading towards. Who can guide this world in the right direction but India? India, which has always believed in prosperity and happiness of all, which always thought of the last and the least in the queue, which has never given material achievements as much importance as spiritual endeavors and achievements. That is the only country which can show the way out of this mess to the world. And as G20 is a significant moment in India's history, political and geopolitical history. And this is the moment, this is a milestone when India needs to tell the world how it should be done. But how can you preach if you do not practice? So we have to practice this value, and this is exactly the discussion that we had with the Honorable Prime Minister when we met him for the opening of the medical college in the small remote area in Mudenhalli, because we were not finding enough doctors, nurses, and paramedics. COVID time, we all know. Even if you wanted, you did not get any facilities. Even if you could pay for it, you did not have experts, you did not have medical professionals to help you. And he himself was lamenting. He told, crores of rupees were spent by corporates, by very many people, like, you talk about CSR and other things, for the sake of providing oxygenators or concentrators and other facilities to hospitals. But when they did an audit on it, this is from the Prime Minister, it's not from me or from some statistician or from some other agency. He said they found that hundreds and hundreds of those boxes were never opened. On one side, we had people suffering, struggling to get oxygen. And you know what happened in Karnataka? We all know about that mess of beds and oxygenated beds. And on the other side, there were oxygenators, concentrators, but there were no people, no experts to open and use it. There were no paramedics, no nursing staff, let alone doctors. That is the kind of world we have created, where we have excesses on one side, but on the other side, we do not have the resources to execute all that we have planned to do. And with the challenge of educating 250 million children in our country and employing probably another 250 million, we are facing a huge crisis at this point of time. Our education system lacks 1 million teachers are missing from our schools because we never paid attention to education sector. Our budgets are peanuts of a budget we have for education sector. And that does not help to cater to the world's largest student population. It doesn't work, and we can't be America and give student loans and get them into a debt trap, and they'll commit suicide. And their student loan is more than the, I don't know, maybe market capitalization of so many other countries. Just student debt. Look, are we planning to head towards the same crisis as these developed, so-called developed nations, the economic behemoths of the world are today? Or are we trying to do it any different is the question that I have come to ask to this very celebrated and very influencing section of the society, which can do a lot if it decides to do. So the whole question comes back to how, as economists, as the people belonging to the corporates, as people belonging to the sections of the society from governments and policymakers can think differently and build an India which is very different from the kind of developed nations that we have seen so far. And that is the kind of story we must tell the world. And this story begins from where India began, with the idea that we are all equal, we are all one, and we are a family. And it's our utmost responsibility to look after each other's welfare, because unless everybody is happy, we cannot be happy. And I'll close with this quote, which says, there cannot be a happy individual in an unhappy family. There cannot be a happy family in an unhappy society. There cannot be a happy society in an unhappy country. There cannot be a happy country in an unhappy world. So it all begins from us to create happiness around ourselves, to bring everybody at par, to give everybody an opportunity to excel and grow. All that I request this forum is, please find ways to provide opportunities, equal opportunities. That is all. No charity. Don't show pity. Don't show compassion. Don't show charity to people. That's unfair. Just give them equal opportunities. There are girls who are waiting to get educated. There are children who can't want to go to school, who are laboring away in the hard days, labor under the sun. There are many patients who are waiting to get their next surgery, but they cannot afford it. There are many, many people who are malnourished. India is globally, after Africa, certain countries of Africa, India is the next in global malnourishment. And we have excess food. We have plenty of food. 80 crore people are served free food for the last 1.5 years by the Prime Minister because of the COVID setbacks. But we don't have nutrition. We don't have children getting balanced diet. So we have stunting, wasting, and delayed growth and deficiency. So all this has to be corrected, and that's not possible by one agency, one organization, or one government. This is where Sarkara Samaja Samstha, the tripod model, is what I'm requesting you are all to pay attention to. And I'm happy that we have people from the government, policymakers, we have industrialists, we have people who have really done all that I'm saying right now. I'm sure many of you and most of you are part of this kind of a ecosystem, but we must tell this story to more people. Once again, thanking you for allowing us to present our case. I rest my case with this advocacy for equal opportunities for everyone. Thank you very much. Samasta Loka, Sugano Bhavantu. And thank you, WMG, again.
Many thanks, Sadhguru, for your insightful discourse and the advocacy that you put forward. And the kind of discourse that you gave, wherein you mentioned about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and the importance of that, and how it has been taken by our Prime Minister for G20 nations presidency this year. And you touched upon what is that as a society we need to take care to make this country a $30 trillion economy. And it's all very well taken, Swamiji, Sadhguru. Thank you so much. May I invite now Anaga to take the proceedings further.
Thank you, sir. On one gloomy morning, capital markets crashed, a large employee base was left stranded, and most importantly, India's reputation was on the brink of being tarnished. All this as the global IT community watched in horror, and India's most iconic story, which we're all going to hear about soon, had begun. To give you a gist about the fiasco, the amazing turnaround, the remarkable corporate operations, the lesson learned, the protection of the interests of the stakeholders, employees, investors, and customers, and the way India is now shining on the IT front is a story that everyone must be a part of. It is just one of the victories in this iconic man's kitty. The name does not make the man makes the name. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you Padma Shri T.N. Manoharan, sir. I request Madan to kindly escort him. Mr. Manoharan has a distinguished career spanning over 4 decades. He was the past president of ICAI. He has served as the chairman of Canara Bank and as the administrator of Lakshmi Vilas Bank till its merger with DSS Bank. C.A. Manoharan is currently a member of the RBI Standing External Advisory Committee for evaluating applications for universal banks and small finance banks. He is on the board of Mahindra & Mahindra, Tech Mahindra, and National Bank for Financing Infrastructure and Development. He is presently chairman of IDBI and the founder of MCA Consulting. C.A. Manoharan is the recipient of several awards, including the CNN-IBN Indian of the Year from the Honorable PM of India. Mr. Manoharan was conferred the civilian honor Padma Shri Award by the President of India, but most importantly, for me and for most of you here, he is our DT Guru, without whom we would have never cleared our exams. Before we hear the turnaround story, let us quickly witness its literature. I request Sadhguru to kindly do the honors of releasing the book. Thank you, sir. I now request TN sir to kindly give a small token of our appreciation to Sadhguru. I also request Dinto Jacob sir to kindly give Mr. Dinto Jacob is the CFO of Citizen Watches. And I now request Team WMG to give a small token of appreciation to Sadhguru sir. Thank you. I now request Sadhguru sir to be please escorted. Manoharan sir, I kindly now request you to take over and say a few words.
Revered Sadhguru Sri Madhusudan Sai, Dr. R. Balasubramaniam, and Mr. Ridham Desai, other special invitees, distinguished members of WMG, and my beloved colleagues in the profession who are part of this assembly. Very pleasant good evening to all of you. It gives me immense pleasure to be part of the proceedings of this symposium, where most of the deliberations are going to be on, how to create new India. What is the way forward and the future? My talk will be slightly different because to get inspired to look forward to create a bright future, you need to celebrate the glorious past. And what happened a decade ago in terms of a unique corporate turnaround story, I'm here standing before you to share. And for the benefit of those who did not closely follow Satyam's story, I want to clarify that I became director after the scam, not before the scam. So that whatever I say, you will receive it in the right perspective. Now, just taking a look at, the corporate world, as all of us know, is enamored by various kinds of frauds across the globe. But of all those frauds, the significant one is the financial statement related fraud because of the magnitude and the adverse impact it can create on all the stakeholders and the impact it can create on market depletion overnight. And in terms of moving further, if you dive deep into, next slide, dive deep into what are the root causes for these kinds of frauds to occur in the corporate world. There can be any number of reasons. I have highlighted the significant ones, but even among this, the most significant one is the common one is the greed. Now, once human mind is engulfed with this kind of a greed, then it's very difficult, and it can be destructive and dangerous. Like Mahatma Gandhi mentioned, there is enough for everybody's need, but not for anybody's greed. And so because of that, and greed doesn't confine to becoming rich or prosperous. Greed can be for even market rating or positioning. It can be power, greed related to power, position, designation, so many things that unfortunately lead to undesirable, unpalatable consequences. And if you look at the major frauds, starting from Enron, WorldCom, all those frauds that happened in US, Western world, which led to the enactment of Sarbanes-Oxley Act, India experienced it for the first time through Satyam. In fact, those days when I used to travel overseas, they called it as Enron of India, that kind of a fraud. And Satyam was the fourth largest IT company those days in India. And it grew very fast in the 80s. And it started in 80s, but grew very fast post the 2000 era. And 53,000 employees and $2 billion top line and 66 country operations. But it all crumbled on 7th of January 2009 when there was a confession made by the promoter that the books were fudged, accounts were fudged for 6 years. Satyam is a unique case. It was not a case of investigation triggering preceding confession. It was a case where confession triggered the investigation. And it was also unique in another context, which I'm going to narrate. It's a turnaround where there was no public money invested by the government. It was public-private partnership. Government offered the moral support, and certain group of individuals came together and turned it around with the help of employees, Satyamites. And what was the nature of the fraud? The fraud was in terms of fictitious billing, fudging the accounts, manipulating the top line. While on one side they were producing software solutions, another side one group was producing fictitious bills. Now, to a group like this, enlightened CFO group, it doesn't take me to explain elaborately. Suffice it to say, when you book fictitious top line, You have to show it as collected. And you cannot show it as collected from across the globe in cash or dollars. It has to be routed through bank accounts. So bank statements were fudged. And once you show it as collected, you should either show it as expended or invested. And such huge amount, it is very difficult to show as expended without corroboratory evidence or to create numerous evidence. So therefore, it was shown as invested as what? Fixed deposits in banks. And therefore, fictitious fixed deposit receipts were produced. And once you show fictitious fixed deposits in banks, you have to account for interest income in the income tax return. Software income was exempt, but interest income was taxable. So you have to pay tax on that. In fact, CBDT chairman in a lighter vein asked me, Manoharan, if we reopen Satyam's case, whether we have to refund the tax paid on non-existent income. I told him at that time I had to be very diplomatic. Being a government nominee, I said, we are yet to study from that dimension. Good that I said that, because after a few months I came to know that even the tax credits claimed were bogus from foreign tax credits. So one led to the other. The whole thing, as CS students, those days I remember in the late 70s, we used to debate whether accounting is an art or a science. But after entering Satyam, I realized it could be a fiction. And, that was a time when global financial crisis was preceded by subprime crisis. What was subprime crisis? US loan market was bubbling with this secondary, subprime lending, where merely on self-declaration loans were given. And many of the borrowers, as a matter of principle, did not pay interest, and in their own interest did not repay the principal borrowed also. With the result, what happened, as CFOs we know, in a balance sheet on the right-hand side, assets, on the left-hand side, capital, reserves, and liabilities. Suddenly, the American banks realized one fine day, the global financial crisis hit them. On the right-hand side, nothing was left, and on the left, nothing was right. Satyam was also exactly in the same position when we walked in. 5,000 crores of fixed deposits were non-existing on the right-hand side. And to that extent, reserves were inflated on the left-hand side. So that was, and monthly salary bill was 500 crores. And US salaries were fortnightly, and rest of the world was monthly. And there was no money in the kitty. And 2,000 crores were outstanding for vendors and suppliers. And PF, ESI, TDS remittance defaulted. And 700 crores were dues from customers, but we did not know how much of that was genuine and how much is receivable. So this was the background in which the confession was done. There could have been many reasons for confession, but one final reason seems to be that global financial crisis led to draining down of inflow of orders. Many of the IT companies, top IT companies, interviewed candidates, the new, rolled out graduates, but they were not sent joining letters. That was a scenario where IT company, that industry itself was facing a lull or a recessionary scenario when this confession came and started, much stronger order on the face of the ground reality. Now, Satyam was listed in US also. And, they tried to bridge the gap. Actually, what the promoter did as a last attempt to rescue Satyam or cover up Satyam was, he wanted to merge it with Matos, companies belonging to the sons. Matos, if you read alphabetically, it is the reverse of Satyam. And it had huge land bank. So they wanted to merge Matos with Satyam so that real asset, land will come on the balance sheet of Satyam. And these fictitious fixed deposits will be shown as having been paid as consideration, so that fictitious asset will be replaced by real asset. But Satyam shareholders did not know this truth. Therefore, they voted against such a merger, and it did not happen. That's why the promoter wrote in the confession letter, you find this wording, it was like riding a tiger, not knowing how to get off without being eaten. Kind of, I think Shakespeare, poetry, you get reminded by this, even in that. It all indicates that it must have started in a small way, and they would have hoped to clear it in the next quarter, next year. But the magnitude went beyond their comprehension. Next slide. Who got affected? Investors, employees, customers, bankers, government. Government was concerned about the reputation of the country, because that was the time when global investors were looking at India as a safe destination for investment. And we were also propagating, and IT industry was the one that put India prominently on the international map, global map. So in that scenario, government had to act immediately. America followed bailout plan methodology on one hand for the banks, and it also allowed some companies to collapse. Market forces to decide the destiny, like Lehman Brothers, AIG. But Indian government thought out of the box. They did not choose both, because that was the election time in 2009. So they felt no taxpayers' money will be spent for this, only public-private partnership. And we will not also allow market forces to determine the destiny of Satyam, because the reputation and image of the country is involved. Therefore, they nominated 6 of us, dissolving the then existed board, which was most of them, executive directors, were already in the jail. So therefore, it got dissolved. And we were given complete freedom, and we prioritized financial stability and customer retention and employee motivation. Those were the things, and we also did all other things that were required. I will not elaborate on all that. But strategically, we decided to meet once in a week, because it was a crisis situation. And but whatever we decided as a strategy, one of us had to stay there and oversee and implement and also give feedback. We had stalwarts like Deepak Parekh, Kiran Karnik, Achyudan, Tarun Das on the board, brilliant minds. I was only a tool, facilitating the implementation. So I offered to stay there 24/7, not because I was unemployed, but because just then I completed serving the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, 2 years staying in Delhi as the Vice President and President. So having stayed away from my profession and family for 2 years, I thought this is another situation that demands my attention on a full-time basis, so I lived there. So for 15 weeks, I was doing everything which the promoter would have done except the fraud. Next. And I did this SWOT analysis, and the idea was very simple: how to, exploit the strength of Satyam, more particularly in terms of the excellent talent pool, and in terms of weaknesses, how to, make them subdued, do not come in the way as an hindrance for turning around, and in terms of opportunities, how to explore and exploit them, and in terms of threats, how to overcome them or bypass them. That is how, the strategy was done. And the modus operandi was immediate stopgap arrangement we organized from IDBI Bank and Bank of Baroda. And we started clearing dues. In fact, many employees came and said, we are willing to forego our variable pay. Some of them said, we are willing to forego the entire thing. On the other hand, there were insecure employees who wanted to resign and go. So we spoke to them. We told them, you are what you are because of Satyam. We are strangers to Satyam. We have come here at the call of the government to turn it around. If you desert the company at this stage, later you will feel guilty of not paying back the gratitude, show the gratitude of the company which made you somebody in life, and therefore join hands with us, help us to facilitate, and then we will celebrate down the line few months later, and then you are free to migrate anywhere you want. That worked. Similarly, for customers, we said, please don't migrate. This is a situation where we are keen on turning around. Patronize us for a few weeks. Wait and watch. If things go positively, you continue to support. Otherwise, you tell us you want to migrate. We will facilitate migration to a competitive service provider, even if the competitor doesn't have the bandwidth to execute because Satyam was unique, some of the projects, only Satyam had the bandwidth to execute. That kind of a project. So we will rebadge our workers on the payroll of the competitors or your own payroll so that the project continuity is ensured. So with that kind of a transparent talk, they said we will wait and watch, but on one condition, we should have a follow-up call every week for fortnightly. So with that understanding, we could retain most of the customers, most of the employees. Next. And we even circulated video clippings and all that to different locations. At one stage, we had to take an immediate decision whether to continue like this for a few years till we clean up the whole thing, or immediately, as is various condition, offer it for strategic investor to invest and take control. We decided that it is in ICU, we cannot prolong it too long, and therefore we initiated the bidding process. Next. And initially we got 141 registrations, but later we found many of them were fictitious or did not have the track record. I mean, Satyam had too many fictitious things happening all through the journey of turnover also. And finally, 10 submitted the expression of interest. I mean, out of that, 7 fulfilled the criteria to whom we sent the documents. Only 5 submitted, then 2 withdrew, 3 stayed in the race. And Wilbur Ross, L&T, and Tech Mahindra. In fact, and they had to be facilitated for due diligence and all those things. So we created a virtual and physical data room, and we gave site inspection, we clarified legal, all those points. And the D-Day was fixed as 13th of April, 2009 for submitting the bids. And I was addressing the leaders and others every vertical on a weekly basis, leaders every evening. So the previous evening I was addressing Oracle division, few in the auditorium and few hundreds on the call. So I clarified to them, I gave them the good news that next week hopefully we'll have a new owner for Satyam. After answering all their questions, one executive stood up and asked one final question. I said, go ahead. He said, suppose on 13th April nobody walks in to buy Satyam. What is that you are going to do? My heart skipped a beat because that was something unthinkable. But I don't know where from I had the answer coming. So I told them, don't worry, we have plan B. They cheered and dispersed. But after they left, I was wondering, what is that plan B I was talking about? So but at that point in time, what was significant was to retain their morale and not let them down. Next. Then, of course, that led to all these changes. In fact, the government withdrew the bill that was pending before the parliament and made further changes, brought in many changes, and then reintroduced it and got it passed, the New Companies Act. And the SEBI also came out with many changes in the regulations and all that. So I will not elaborate on this. Then next, in close quarters, having seen Satyam turnaround, I found many things, though, we learn it through our, Vedas and epics, all the moral lessons that are told to us both in the schools and discourses, it get buried, or, sometimes you will have to make them surface by introspection. So I could introspect all these things, especially for, finance executives. Satyam finance executives were the worst affected. They were not, they were summoned by investigating agencies with an eye of suspicion, multiple agencies, right from, enforcement directorates, CBI, and state CBDI, all of them, and even this, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, SFIO, all those agencies, and that dented their social status and image. The neighbors instructed their children not to play with the children of the Satyam executives. And when a Satyam executive walked into a function, social function, all of them gave way, not because he is a VIP. Suddenly he became untouchable. Nobody wanted to show that he is related to him or known to him. And some of the Satyam employees, the son or daughter alliance fixed, they were not sure whether it will go through. Some of them wanted money out of their savings for certain expenditure or higher education of the children. Suddenly they realized most of their savings were stuck up in ESOPs of Satyam, which was not worth the paper on which it was printed, because the share price came down to 6 rupees. So all that, and earlier Satyam employees were premium customers in any joint they walked in. Later, the story was just the opposite. In fact, they were feeling ashamed to disclose that they were employees of Satyam. These were all ground realities. And in life's, in accountancy, we know there is contra entry. Every credit has a debit and vice versa. But in life's books of account, there is no contra entry allowed. You may do 10 good things. One bad thing can wipe out all the credit accumulated out of good things. And, I don't want to run through each and every one of that. Actually, good people don't need laws to tell them what to do, what not to do. They know by themselves. But similarly, bad people, whatever be the amendment that you bring about in the law, they always try to find out ways and means to circumvent it. Because morality cannot be legislated. At best, conduct can be regulated. That is what the government is attempting to do. And we should learn to differentiate between opportunities and temptations. While we should not miss opportunities, we should not be lured by temptations. And maybe the promoter of Satyam loved wealth and used people to create it. Actually, in life, we should love people and use wealth to spread it. Because life by itself has no meaning. Life is only an opportunity for us to give it a meaning. First 25 years or so we learn, next 35, 40 years or so we earn. But life becomes more meaningful when you share what you have earned and what you have learned to those who are in need of it. So that is how life can become more meaningful. And that is how you can live beyond the age in the hearts of all those beneficiaries whom you touch. And you may reach the top by sheer vision, hard work, competitiveness. But to stay there, you need integrity. Otherwise, the fall could be mighty. That is another lesson. And in fact, we were chairing the board meeting in turns, every week's board meeting. So when my turn came in the initial days to chair, whoever chaired had to be the spokesperson to the media to brief what is not so confidential or secretive, because we cannot disclose everything. So I briefed that day's certain decisions, and Q&A began. One of the journalists asked me, Manoharan, you are all temporary directors nominated by the government. Satyam is a sinking ship. What is that you can do? So he emphasized on, you are all temporary directors. Again, with all humility at my command, I smiled at him and said, we are all temporary in this world, but we can build institutions which are permanent in this world. We can resurrect organizations which can stay eternal. So we are mortals, but institutions need not be. Principles need not be. Values need not be. You have to be adaptive to the technological evolution, but fundamentals we have to stay strong all through, irrespective of the changes that happen around us. So that philosophy, I think, was one of the greatest learnings. In fact, Satyam survived because of this strong fundamentals. Only the accounts were fudged. Operations, the culture of work culture, all those things, and second line, third line, even when the top line vanished, the company could survive. And in fact, I told you, the customers insisted on follow-up call. Every call, they used to grill me with so many questions, initial days. Gradually, the number of questions mellowed down, came down, and the confidence was there. After answering all their questions, I used to ask them one question. How is the project delivery? How is the service delivery by the Satyamites? You know what was the answer? Unanimously from all the customers. Before the scam, it was good. Now it is the best. Which implied that the Satyam employees understood its do or die situation, now or never. They put their heart and soul. And if you ask me one single factor that was instrumental, it's not government has to be applauded for this brilliant idea. Government nominated boards did what best. In fact, as I said, entire credit should go to all those legendary personalities on the board. I was only a tool facilitating implementation. And but the greatest contributors have been the Satyamites, the employees. And of course, when we do our duty without expectations, that's what Lord Krishna told Arjuna, isn't it? So do your duty, unmindful of the consequences or rewards. I think if that is practiced by us day to day, that's what I tell my students also for CA exams. CA exams, I tell them, because CA, many people think CA means come again. I used to tell them it is not come again, it is conquer again and again. So if you have perseverance and if you put your heart and soul, give your best, success may not come when you want it, the way you want it. But if you have perseverance, success will definitely come one day. And as and when it comes, it will be much better than what you wanted. You know, that is the learning. And finally, nothing is impossible if you have that nobility or good intent to accomplish what you want to accomplish. So that is a great learning, because, the whole universe conspires to make it happen. That in the very first board meeting, I proposed it that there's a call of the nation. Let us not charge any sitting fee or compensation. Let us work pro bono. It was unanimously agreed and passed. In fact, that I came to know was a critical fact which influenced all the global customers who said, later after the turnaround celebrative time, they said, we supported you because we came to know of this. You are all working pro bono. It will not happen in our country. They confessed. It is India where this can happen. So therefore, we started giving weightage to whatever you people said. We started listening to whatever you wanted to say. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the wonderful opportunity. I'm equally eager to listen to the stalwarts who are going to talk about the future of India, and maybe in Q&A I'll also join them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. That was totally insightful, amazing, and wow. Yes, we're all intrigued by the Satyam story and at how amazing the turnaround has been. T.N. Manoharan sir has been kind enough to sign a copy for all of y'all, and y'all can pick it up on the way out. Embarking on his journey in the development sector by living and working for several years among remote forest-based tribal communities, Dr. R. Balasubramaniam is a widely respected development activist, leadership, a trainer, thinker, and writer. He is the member HR in the Capacity Building Commission of the Government of India. He is also a visiting professor at Cornell University, USA, and an IIT, Delhi, where he teaches courses on leadership and human development. He is the chairman of the Social Stock Exchange Advisory Committee set up by SEBI. His living habits were greatly influenced by the teachings of Swami Vivekananda at the age of 19. He founded the Swami Vivekananda youth movement based on the principles of ahimsa, satya, seva, and tyaga. He has spent more than 3 decades of his life in the service of the rural and tribal poor in the forests of India. He is also the founder of Grassroots Research and Advocacy Movement, a public policy think tank in India. But what stands out the most is his never-fading smile and his humble nature that touches one and all. I welcome you, sir.
So many of you still sitting here today. I was remembering a very famous English quote as I was listening to all of them. It's a wonderful quote. It says, if there are so many speakers in any audience, that audience have to listen to, the quote goes like this: listen to the first, tolerate the next, and throw out the rest. So me and Rhythm have a real challenge to follow up on such an extraordinary presentation by 2 people. But I feel they made my job easier too. Swamiji spoke about social protection and the need for what needs to be done. And Manoharan spoke about market failure. And both of these justify why government should exist. The state and state capacity is a subject of a lot of research has happened. Last 10 years of my life has been spent trying to understand it, research about it. And my journey began in the forest. And very soon I was a very disillusioned activist who thought the easiest approach to human development is blame the government. They have failed and therefore everything collapses. After some time I shifted the blame and said, this private sector, they are the screwed up people in this country. Extractive industry rapes the earth, destroys it, and so private sectors are sinners. The capitalists are all sinners. The government is mediocre, inefficient. Private sector is all absolutely untrustworthy, and we are the saviors of the world, the social sector. And I, for many years, believed that we could actually supplement the state and deliver services, goods and services the state could not. It took me 30 years to realize that at best we can supplant the state. The state is here to stay. Satyams may come, Satyams may go, but the government of India will remain. And that's when I started understanding how governments function. My journey took me to Harvard, took me to all places, started getting deeper into it. And today, my job is very easy. I'm the member HR overseeing 40 million civil servants of this country. That's all. I don't say this with any pride. I say this because the challenge ahead of us. And I'm an outsider. I'm a rank outsider. Sometimes I even wonder what the Prime Minister saw in an activist like me who's been beaten up and arrested by the state to actually sit on the other side of the fence. And then one of my friends very casually mentioned to me, a childhood friend, he said, you remember when you were made the class monitor when you're in 4th standard? I said, yes, I remember, because that's a very proud thing for me. You know why they made you the monitor? I said, no, I don't know, because you are the most naughtiest in class. So being the most loudest activist and critique of the state, and very funnily, just 2 months before my appointment, I wrote an article, Is India's Steel Frame Rusting? And maybe I don't know, the article caused my problems, but here I am. So I'm going to walk you through a fascinating journey of the last 2 years of mine with the system and reporting to one of I never had a boss in my life. I was all alone all my life. And my wife makes fun of me and says, for the first time, there's somebody to hold you accountable and responsible for the job you do. And reporting to the Honorable PM has been an extraordinary lesson in leadership by itself for me. And I just want to walk you through the story of India's journey. And I was very happy when Manoharan said, do your job without looking for consequences. Mission Karma Yogi is exactly that. And therefore, it's a good segue for me to start off. So 3 years ago, after COVID, the Honorable PM, all this is something you know. Unfortunately, I can't control slides. I don't show slides because I don't believe in them. And then Rajesh said, are you going to use slides? I actually had half the heart to send back. I don't believe in PowerPoints. Hopefully, I'll leave back some powerful points for all of you. But then I thought, okay, let me put something together. So we have done a lot. It's not there? Okay. So we have done a lot in our country. The 9-year journey, and I'm not here to advocate what all has been achieved, but significantly a lot has been achieved. And remember, the government of India operates with a 42% vacancy of human resources. We are one of the cheapest governments in the world. I have been an advisor to a foreign government. And I know 1 in 14 in that nation which I advised was a civil servant. The country ran because the president is afraid of coups. And the only way to prevent a coup is anybody who makes a noise, give him a job. And therefore a salary. And they destroyed the sector I was trying to resurrect. And therefore I understand we are an extraordinary nation. And you got to remember our history. We inherited the civil services, a colonially driven civil services, which even today, despite so many interventions that we have, I'm very glad that when the Prime Minister gave a call for Panch Pran, he said decolonize. And I'll tell you the DNA of decolonization, the colonization is so embedded in every one of us. If I don't speak in English, I'm not valued. And that's just significantly strong. We somehow have this embedded challenges that our country faces. We still call the deputy commissioners of many districts in some states as district collectors. What are they called collectors for? Because they were collecting taxes from subjects ruled by the British. They were not administering a district. There are only two functions. They were just regulating law and order and collecting taxes. And that is the bureaucracy we inherited. And 1947, the ICS as it was called, the joke going around was they're neither Indian nor civil nor a service. That's how they were known. But then, you should also appreciate the kind of people we had then. All the challenges, a nation of 350 million people, a nation where we had less than 2% of global GDP, and today it's close to 10%, Swamiji, global GDP. We are racing, we are $3.8 trillion, soon we'll be the fourth largest economy in the world, and that's not so important to me either, but I'll tell you the kind of economy that the government is conceiving India to become. And when we had to provide everything, I don't know how many people in this audience even remember things like modern bread. Yeah, most of us were sick those days. My mother would say, go buy bread and come. As though bread and milk will cure your fever. It was the paracetamol or Dolo 650 of those days, modern bread. And we would all go get that. It was made by the government of India. Everything, if you booked, my dad booked a Bajaj scooter, and with a celebration time when it was delivered, because it only took 13 years to get it. Right? That is how we were as a nation. When I became a doctor and came home and told my dad, oh, I'm a physician now, he said, great. I thought he was actually happy I became a doctor, first in the family. And then he said, now we can get our telephone in 6 months. We had a scheme called OIT Special, where if you're a physician, you get it in 6 months. OIT General is 10 years. And that was the India that we had. And we, as a nation, we had to understand that the country had to ensure it provided for citizens. So the bureaucracy were trained to be taking care of an administration which had a provider mindset. Give, give, give. And when you give, you don't respect the other side. They didn't know the Vivekananda quote, don't stand on a pedestal and say, here, my poor man, take your 5 cents. But consider yourself privileged that you've been given an opportunity to serve. That was not the mantra. When you give, you control. And when you control, you tell the person how to lead his life. And that's how the nation's civil services were. 90s, when we privatized or deregulated or globalized, I was living in the forest with tribals, the poorest of the poor of this country, in situations that you can't even think. I was trying to imitate and live their lives. And I read the paper, and our newspapers used to come 3 days late to the forest. And suddenly we decided, a country announced a trickle-down economy, and I was waiting for it to trickle down. 20 years down the line, it's only beginning to trickle down now. Nothing trickled down. And suddenly the bureaucrats had to now become run a state which is a provisioning state. They had to understand how not to regulate, how to tell Bajaj make more scooters. Earlier they had to tell them you can't make that extra scooter and you will be punished. Today they had to tell them make. It's not easy. And today the Prime Minister talks of Jan Bhagidari, possibly a concept never tried anywhere in the world, because governments flourish by having two instruments in their hands, the instrument of agency and the instrument of control. And asking it to be ceded to citizens, it doesn't come easy. My first earlier book called I the Citizen, if I were to rewrite it again, today I would worry that we the citizens are not ready to participate in partnerships. Because we live in a political economy where we want everything free. If somebody can cook your food and feed it down your mouth, you will be very happy. And in that, partnership doesn't come easy. So shifting the narrative of the revenues and subsidies and saying, let's together be a part of Team India and build a great new India that the Prime Minister talks about is not an easy journey for him. But he felt after COVID, I don't know where the slides are, but anyway, so he felt COVID taught an extraordinary lesson. First time margins were blurred. Companies making cars were making masks. We might have had unopened oxygenators, but we had companies coming forward and donating those oxygenators. Charity's got a problem. Sometimes we overdo stuff, and that's a big challenge. As an NGO, I know we have 2 oxygen plants donated to our hospital, and in the fear of what will happen, we took both. And we're only able to use one now, because need for that kind of oxygen is gone. But for the first time, government, the public sector, the private sector, and civil society came together and demonstrated that we can work together. Today, the skill sets that government needs is no longer providing or provisioning. It needs to understand the spirit of partnership And you can't run a government in the spirit of partnership if you don't build their capacities. What we are doing in the government, if I were to share with you the next 10, 15 minutes, I can tell you private sector will be envious of what we are doing. And that is the magic I'm going to unpack for you. Mission Karma Yogi was personally conceived by the Prime Minister, and he felt that this is what India's bureaucracy should be, because it needs to be future ready. India is going to be the future global leader, and we need to have that pride and that space where we can tell the world this is how you run your countries. And when he thought about it, he said, three simple paradigms. I'm not even sure where all. Can you show the next slide? Okay, I'll just let it pause there for some time. So he gave just three paradigms. Can you pause it? Next slide. The one that you showed. I'm sorry. Oh, no. No, the workplace. Okay, forget the slides. I'll talk. It's easier not to get distracted. Now I'll make the powerful points. So my office will be disappointed, but anyway, they'll say, did you use the slides? Because they're all thrilled to even hear that I actually use slides. So you should take a picture with the slides and give to me. Three very simple things he said when he gave us the mandate. The first thing was, he said, shifting mindset from thinking like I'm just a karmachari to behaving like a karma yogi. Unpacking karma yoga is not easy, but we had to start somewhere. I felt when I took charge that even thinking you're a karmachari is good enough. I'm taking my salary, let me do my damn job. That itself is very good for this nation. But then he said that's not enough. We want them to behave like a karma yogi, expect nothing in return, but build a great nation. Now it works well for the Prime Minister, but working for 20 million civil servants of the government of India and 20 more million of all the governments put together in this country is not going to be easy. How do you shift mindsets of these people who are used to mediocrity, who are used to not being held accountable, and who are used to just getting away with whatever inefficiencies they had in the system? Suddenly you're telling them, no, you can do a damn good job. Let's get down to do it. So we needed to unpack this a bit. The second thing he said is people are used to a rule-based approach. You walk into a government office, they'll tell you why this can't be done, why that can't be done, how you cannot do this. He said, rules are important, but transcending the approach from a rule-based thinking to understanding I have a role to play. My role is to build this nation. I use rules to play my role. And that's a huge ask in a real organizational setup. And the third, he said, is how do you get our people to understand, if you want to be future ready, you got to be a lifelong learner. Now government, you write an UPSC exam, one of the toughest, much more tougher than the CA exams, I must tell you. I must find a good acronym for UPSC now. And less than 0.2% of this country qualify for that exam. And once they take the exam, they think they are know-alls. And then they don't study anything after that. They just stop. And that's the reality of this country was. It's not that it's there today. We have understood all this from the past, and I'm talking what was there. And he said, if you want to really build a future-ready nation, you've got to be lifelong learners. So we shifted the thinking and said, earlier, people had to actually learn how to do their work. Today we say your only work is to keep learning. And that's a big shift in Government of India. And we run the world's largest learning management system, which is no system in the world can match what we have today called Karmayogi Bharat. It's a separate Section 8 company, which has got a list of, I'll talk a little while from now about what it is. So to unpack this, we said, what do you build capacities for? Why do you need capacity? I've already explained. But what do you build it for? Capacity for what? To idle? To sit at home? To cook, make a good meal? Capacity for what was the first question. And we decided to operate, and I created an acronym called WWW. The first W is understanding what is our work. What does public administration even mean today? Public good definition has changed. We had vaccines which are given free. And then we had vaccines for which giving the vaccine you have to pay for 100 rupees. So the government paid the private sector. And then we said those who can afford it can take it at 1,000 rupees. So we altered the definition of what is a public good. The state exists to ensure public good to its citizens. Definition of public good itself is so dynamic today around the world, not just here. We have SBI, we also have to regulate ICICI. We run Air India for some time, then we sell it, but we still have to regulate the newly sold out Air India also. It's a very complex operation, running a state, and I realized it when I got inside. We are one of the most cheapest governments in the world. Many of you may not even be aware of this. And defining work, keeping the future in mind is so difficult. Thankfully, we have a Prime Minister who's an extraordinary visionary. He gave us a very simple mandate and said, don't worry about Amrit Kal right now. That's 25 years. But what I need the next 2-3 years, at least he said, limit it to your term. He was very practical. He said, just think of your 3 years and do this for me. The first thing he said was, how do you take India and build an inclusive $5 trillion economy? Where the Antyodaya concept, the last man down the street, is part of the economic engine, either in the production cycle or at least in the redistribution network. Second, Atmanirbharata is not just a slogan. Atmanirbharata is a much deeper opportunity for us to throw away this colonial mindset of I am not capable. The sense of pride you feel when he addresses the US Congress is part of that Atmanirbharata too. Or the sense of pride you feel when you travel around the world and today say India and they know where it is. Right? 40 years ago when I used to travel and give lectures in the US, I had actually showed the map and said, this is India. This is where I come from, Karnataka. And they never figured it out. Today you don't have to say anything. Bangalore is actually a word in the American dictionary, right? And that's how we have moved on. And third, Atmanirbharata is not as an economic principle of production, but in the way we think, in the way we ideate. Because like our earlier speakers said, if you don't learn from your past, you'll never be able to build a great future. And we started looking at it. The cabinet order, setting up Mission Karmayogi says, build this on the civilizational ethos of India. For the first time, we had the courage to say, we had a great past, let's build the future based on that. Third, he said ease of living, ease of doing business. Many of you here may not agree. It's a learning journey. Overnight, and Indians are in a hurry. Press a button, tomorrow everything should change. A lot of friends call me and say, you've been there 2 years, we're still seeing the same things. I know some questions have come. What changes happened? Surprisingly, I was just checking my WhatsApp message before I come here, because my job now is, a lot of government work happens on WhatsApp, whether I like it or not. And we are supposed to be 24/7 keyed into it. I had a message from a young woman who just worked with me for a month or two. And it was very touching. She said, sir, I just went to the police station this morning, and the way they treated me and the way they ensured that my job was done so well. And I asked them, I suddenly remembered what I was working with you for, and I asked them, have you been trained by Mission Karmayogi? And they said, yes. And that is how we are like this. And she said, thank you, sir. Impact will be felt by citizens. Impact is not when we have press conferences, or we have a program called Police, Karmayogi Police. The Delhi, all the union territory, because the government of India doesn't have a lot of citizen footprint, right? We only have to work through structures of the federal government. Delhi police have been trained just before the G20 event, and they'll be one of the most citizen-friendly polices, not just in this country, in the world itself. And the entire spirit of Bhagavad Gita's Karma Yoga is the training program for them. And they are going to be the people who are going to receive all the foreign guests and all that's going to happen. I'm saying this not out of anything. I'm saying this out of absolute pride and gloating pride, actually, because there's a lot of changes happening, and we have to celebrate changes. We as a nation are very tuned to look at the dark clouds above. I think we as Indians should get the DNA to start looking at the silver lining, however small it is. And each of us contribute to expand that silver lining. The dark cloud gets crowded out at some point of time. That much we owe to the future. So understanding work meant $5 trillion economy, inclusive economy, ease of living, including ease of doing business. It's not easy doing business in this country. My son just set up a new startup, and I know the challenges he's going through, and the deal we have is I will not interfere at all. Because in India, if you don't know somebody, you can't do anything. That's the reality. That's the ease of doing business. But that's changing. Setting up a company is possibly easy. I know closing down a company is much more challenging. And we at least know the problems today, and we're solving it. Fourth is, Prime Minister announced in a talk a month ago, the citizen is my new center of everything. He is a new mantra. Citizen-centric governance is here to stay. And that is going to happen. And the last is deploying emerging technologies. We cannot imagine the technologies that are getting deployed. I'm really saddened by the fact that private sector is not ready to capitalize on tools like Gati Shakti and the National Infrastructure Pipeline. We have done analysis of why we are not able to move ahead, why are cost overruns and time overruns happening. It is not the public sector in its capacity. Unfortunately, in this country, the manufacturing sector and the infrastructure sector is not as geared up as the government in helping us spend the $1.3 trillion kept for the NIP program itself. So there are a lot of challenges on both sides of the fence, but it's not the time to look at who's better or who's bad. It's time to see how do we synergize and work together. Samaj, Sarkar, Bazaar is the only way you can solve the problem, because we want to build a life economy based on the principle of life that the Prime Minister talks about, which is no longer going to be shareholders. It's going to be stakeholders. It's a new for-benefit economy where every participant gets the benefit of this new economy that we're going to create. And hopefully it'll happen. It takes time. So these 5 things were defined as work. Then we looked at the workplace. In the workplace, the government of India for the first time has had an HR audit done. Just imagine, your companies might be 50,000, 500,000 at the most, maybe 170,000, we think it's great. Try doing an HR audit for 3.2 million people in one stretch. Then you'll know how difficult it is. In India, everything is numbers. Today, we know what is missing. We've actually sat in the work. I have shadowed for 7 months, doing nothing but just sitting with every single position of the government of India, from the multitasking staff to watching the cabinet secretary operate. So a lot of things, a lot of learnings, because we have the outside, we never understand the government. It's easy to criticize it when you don't understand. So understanding the workplace. Why shouldn't a government office look like a corporate entity? And I could challenge any of you, just walk into my capacity building commission, and you'll actually feel proud that it's a damn good office. Why shouldn't the Indian Parliament be what it is today? Why shouldn't Central Vista happen? And say every single government office on Kartavya Path, on the places, will be the best in the world. And we are trying to do that. And we should take pride in all these things. Last is the work person. And when we talk of the work person, we have actually mapped these 3.2 million people. Mapped them ministry-wise. 93 ministries and a few attached offices. We just started. Government of India is a big operation. In that, we have developed capacity building plans for every single ministry, where every single employee is mapped. For what? His roles have been defined. Government of India, most people don't even have a job description. So how do you measure performance when you don't know what you're supposed to be doing? We have changed all that. The first chapter of the report that we're going to submit to Prime Minister is on performance. How does a good performance look like for government? And in this particular case, we are now looking at each individual. How does he contribute to his division in the government? How does his division contribute to the ministry? How does the ministry contribute to the government of India's larger vision the Prime Minister has set? And we measure them, map their roles, map the functions they do, the activities that enables them to deliver on their functions, and every single competency he needs to do those activities. The kind of micro detailing that has been done, I don't think anybody can even envisage the kind of work that has happened. His behavioral competencies to transition from a karmachari to a karma yogi have been mapped. The deficits we know. His functional competencies, if you're a joint secretary, whichever ministry you're joint secretary of, you deliver the same, you need the same functional competencies. His domain competencies, maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you're agriculture secretary this morning, tomorrow morning you're health secretary. Till yesterday you were telling farmers how to plow their land, today morning you're telling doctors how to prescribe their medicines, and you're an expert in neither. Right? That has changed. Today you cannot get a posting or a promotion if you cannot demonstrate competency acquisition. The algorithm that we have in IGOT, the architecture that is there, and it's a great thing because it is given to us by private sector, pro bono, and philanthropic organizations, and IT professionals from Bangalore help create it for us. It's got 6 hubs. It's got a competency hub where each individual, the moment he puts his employee ID of Government of India, and he says, this is my job, it will say, these are the 20 competencies you need to do your job. They're all mapped. And then there's a proctored assessment hub. He has to go take the assessment. This year we have not rolled it out. We are going by self-declared assessment of what he believes his competencies are. But next year onwards, he has to get himself proctored assessed. And then he will know what are the deficits. And the algorithm will tell him, these are the 40 courses you can do. It's a marketplace. From Harvard to Cornell to ISB to Government of India's institutions, courses are out there. They can do those courses. Your courses are liked, they stay. If they're not liked, the course gets thrown out. So we are setting standards. We have set learning standards for institutions to give us courses. So a lot of changes happening. There are discussion hubs, there are career hubs. A lot of functional changes have happened. Maybe in the days to come, structural changes in the bureaucracy will also start. And I can tell you the kind of journey that is there. People are very enthused by public service when they join. Somehow the system has forgotten how to keep them enthused for 30 years. A lot of structural barriers, functional barriers, a lot of challenges, a lot of incentives, non-incentives are there. It's not easy to still stay focused and deliver to the state. A lot of technological changes are happening. Citizens are becoming very demanding. In all this complexity, that fellow is supposed to stay motivated. And I want to just end my talk with one example. I know there's a lot more. It's all there in the slides. Since it's not in any order, like I said, I don't use slides and this is a disaster. So please excuse me for this. But I will have to end with one program that we did. I'm sure most of the people sitting in this room, when was the last time you even took a train journey? Anybody who took a train journey in the last 3 months? Last 1 month? See so many answers. If you're taking a train journey and there's a TTE talking to a person to allot a berth and the person pays 50 rupees to him, what is the first thought that you get? Be honest, what's the first thought? You see a transaction happening between a TTE and a person asking for a berth and the person is giving 50 rupees. What's the first thought you get? Corruption. That's a sad part of India's public service. How many of you remember in the last 1 week traveling in a public bus or meeting a policeman doing his job and walking up to him and saying, thank you for your service? Have any of you done it even? Right? We say it's their damn job. Well, it's your job also to run your companies. It's his job to run the country. How many of us go thank him? How many of you walk down a bus? The fellow's bad driver, you will say, hey, in Kannada we say, Mane helbut bandilwa, and all that. Right? But how many of us will walking down and say, thank you for bringing me safely to my destination? We don't. Public service is a thankless job because we, the citizens, don't thank them for it. It's time to change that. You want them to perform, start with appreciation. Then demand accountability. A lot of things will happen. Today, what we did in Rail Karma Yogi program, 1 million employees are there in the Indian Railways. Yes, accidents happen. I'm not blaming, I'm not justifying anything or condoning anything. We looked at how many people actually interface with citizens. More than a year ago, we sent research teams across the country, all divisions, doing ethnographic research, watching how many people interact with citizens. Only 4 positions in the Indian Railways interact with citizens. The first is, can you please close the slides itself down? That's the easiest. The first is the ticket clerk. Despite IRCTC and all the online things, 60% of railway tickets are still at the counter. People go stand in line and buy the tickets. The second is the booking clerk, the parcel clerk. The real money for Indian Railways is there, not in passenger traffic. Third is the TTE, which most of us know. And fourth are the small station masters, station masters. Big stations, you won't know who it is. Small stations, they are gods. And do you know, on an average, how many skirmishes a booking clerk has with the citizens of this country in a day, 8-hour operation? Any guess? Just a wild guess. 10. He's got 80 different, average of 80 skirmishes every day. And we bucketed them into 12 major areas. He doesn't have change, he gets shouted at. He gives 2 rupees more, he gets shouted at. In our research we found, can't you even count properly? That also you shout at him. The booking clerk, he weighs it, it says 20 kg freight charge, 20 kg freight charge, he'll start writing, the fellow will say, no, write 15 kgs. 15 kg लिख लीजिए. He said, लेकिन 20 kg है, 5 kg adjust करेंगे. The clerk takes money also, he shouts. The clerk doesn't take money also, he gets shouted at. In a funny world, you're corrupt also, you get shouted at. If you don't want to be corrupt also, you get shouted at. So we calculated 80 different skirmishes these people. Just imagine doing your jobs the whole day, day after day, and the citizens of this country not just don't say thank you, come and shout at you 80 times a day. And after that, you're still working for the country. It's asking a lot, right? And we ran a program. We actually did citizen survey because the Prime Minister doesn't get satisfied with the work we do. He says, finally, what difference has it made to the last man down the line? And he said it so beautifully, and I'll explain it and stop there. We actually did a survey to understand citizens' perception of Indian Railways. So we have baseline data. Others immediately people will say, when we tell these stories, people say, government, you're fudging figures. That's another problem in our country. We don't even trust the state, right? Because all our laws, inherited by the British and left behind by them, is built on mistrust of citizens. Only now we are shifting it to trusting citizens. It takes a long while. And we actually mapped it. We have trained them in a program called Rail Karmayogi. And the fascinating stories, and we realized we can't train 1.4 billion people of this country to say thank you. We can train 96,000 people who face these citizens to live with no thank you. That's the best we could do. We made them Karmayogis, asked nothing in return. And we did something else, but that's not enough because we can't give them any other incentive. We created an app called Karmayogi app, where the railway employee feels good about what he did. He just uploads it. And more people like it, it gets surfaced up. And then we see it, we see the data, and we go back and we tell the railway authorities, the board or the minister to write them a letter. So there's a system now falling in place. But we have had stories where an young woman, a 26-year-old young TT, she's a double master's, but very highly qualified people take these jobs. She had a husband-wife couple traveling. She just decided, and the woman was pregnant, and they didn't have a reserve ticket. She gave her birth, paid for the excess amount herself, went standing the whole night, and said that lady needs to have a birth. And how did we get to know? Because that citizen tweeted. This is what the railways employee did for my wife. We have had another employee who gave his seat, TTE again, who sat on the, this favorite sat sitting on the, what do you call that, the steps with the door open, and he had an elderly lady sleeping in his berth. So I'm just giving you 2-3 stories. A lot of such stories. Change is happening quietly. It is our clouding of vision. You're all standing in front of a mirror and crying, I can't see my image. But remember, all that it needs is to wipe that mirror clean. Mission Karmayogi is wiping that mirror for citizens. And hopefully you'll all join this revolution by not saying we and they, but that saying that together we can actually build a great country. And that is the Team India for all our dreams. Thank you.
If you want to be future ready, you should be a lifelong learner. What a powerful statement, sir. Thank you for those thoughtful insights. We have a lot to digest. An eternal optimist, a man who believes we are in the cusp of a great revolution, and a walking econopedia. Let me have the great honor of introducing none other than our very own Mr. Ridham Desai. He is an Indian economist and the managing director of Morgan Stanley India. He has been with the firm for over 26 years. He's known for his research on the Indian economy and equity markets and is considered a leading expert in the field. He's a regular commentator in the financial press and is frequently invited to speak at industry conferences. Like the big bull Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, Ridham is also widely known for his bullish stance on the Indian economy and equity markets. And like I always say, WMG is all about experiences. And to add another one of those insightful experiences, I now hand you over to Mr. Ridham Desai to address all of you and to take us through the making of New India.
So mine is going to be the hardest act now, because after those 3 speeches, I don't know how I'm going to actually improve on them. So thank you for your patience in advance. So if I have to summarize what I'm going to say today, I think the phrase that I'm going to leave behind, and maybe you can mull over this and let it digest, it's Triveni Sangam. Okay, so yeah, that's there in Prayagraj, but India is undergoing a Triveni Sangam. It doesn't happen very often in the history of the world. Nations don't go through this that often, but India is. And that is actually the foundation for why I am so bullish on the future of this country. So as His Holiness Sadhguruji said, the benefit that India has is it's modern in its ways, but the foundation, the ancient foundation, provides a kind of grip that very few countries in the world have. I dare say nobody actually has. So what is this Triveni Sangam? The Triveni Sangam is the confluence of political, social, and economic factors. And they're all coming together actually in today's India, like never before in India's own history, but also almost never before in world history. I'll actually start with the social factors, and then I'll talk about the economic factors, and the political thing is the easiest bit. So India is undergoing a social transformation. It may not be visible to your naked eye, but what has happened in the last 10 years is unprecedented. We've had actually something that is unthinkable, say 10 years ago. There's been a dramatic decline in female feticide. People have stopped killing female infants. That was rampant in this country. We had a gender ratio which was skewed towards men. Therefore, there were plenty of men who did not have female partners. That has actually reversed now. There's been a 5% decline in our gender ratio in 10 years. It's a mega change. It doesn't happen in a decade. 5% change in gender ratios takes much longer than a decade. But that was the extent of female feticide we had only a decade ago. And this has got far-reaching consequences on nation building. When you start respecting the girl child, you get a big change. And by the way, this girl child is also going to school now, thanks to the midday meal and thanks to the QR codes that are being sent to poor people. And I'll come to that in a moment. The second big social change is that infant mortality has declined by almost 25% in the last 10 years. So we have managed to deliver, and this is despite COVID, by the way. Okay, so this includes the 2.5 years of COVID. So despite COVID, we've managed to reduce the number of infants that are dying in this country. And this has got dramatic consequences again, to the future of the nation. The third big change, that has gone under, this has also happened only in 10 years. It's amazing. Our fertility rate has dropped by 25%. And when I saw the data, I was stunned. Now we are, actually as a country, we have a fertility rate which is 2. So that's below reproduction, that's below the replacement rate. Replacement rate for a population is 2.1. We're now at 2. And that aggregate fertility rate, of course, there are variances. In South India, that number is now is 1.6 or 1.7. In North India, it's still 2.4. So there are variances across the country, but on the nation average, we're at 2, which means that we're going to have fewer kids to support in the next 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years. You see, the last 100 years or the last 80 years, we've spent a lot of our resources growing up kids. And when you are spending so much of resources growing up kids, you have very little left to do other things. And actually, as a consequence, you remain poor. That is about to change because the number of kids that are getting born in this country now is falling. Don't worry, our demographics are still intact. It won't be until the turn of this century, so long after I've left this planet, that our population will actually decline. China's population declined last year, is going to continue to decline, and we'll come to that later. I think Smita has a question for me, so I'm not going to take it up right now. But these are dramatic social changes that are happening. And if you think about, what happened and why did this take place, it all goes back to the Prime Minister's vision of promoting women and promoting the girl child. So we're achieving gender equality in a very natural way. Now, also what has happened on the social arena is something called direct benefits transfer. I'm sure all of you have heard about DBT. DBT has been a revolution. And again, Bangalore is a big contributor to this because Nandan Nilekani seeded Aadhaar. I've done a video with Nandan actually. It's on YouTube. Please watch it. It's 12 minutes, very short, very crisp. He explains what Aadhaar is, and I'll steal the thunder here. So like GPS answers the question, where am I? Correct? Aadhaar answers the question, who am I? And when you know who you are, I mean, when somebody knows who you are, then a myriad of transactions actually take place. So you can do a financial transaction, you can do a property transaction, you can do a goods transaction. So it has been a revolution which, by the way, is not available in the rest of the world. And the rest of the world is looking at us in a quizzical way as to what exactly is this India stack and what exactly is happening. And India stack is just unfolding at the rate of knots. But what Aadhaar did was allow the government to take its entire social transfers away from the age-old, physical, archaic ledger keeping, where people would come in and sign and claim what the government wanted to give them but never get it because the middlemen would take away most of it, into technology-driven, bank account-driven direct transfer. I was just adding up the numbers. In the last 9 years, the Indian government has transferred almost $400 billion to poor people. Now, in 2015, I had done this calculation. In the preceding 30 years, we had transferred $500 billion to poor people. I dare say a lot of it did not reach poor people, and which is why we did not see significant shifts in poverty. I don't know if you have just seen the report that came out last week from the United Nations, which talks about poverty in India. It is stunning. It's gone down like this. It's not gone down like this. It has gone down like this. So they have given data for 2011, 12, 2016, 17, and 2022. So despite COVID, we have experienced a dramatic decline in poverty. And I would actually say that DBT has been a very big foundation to this. So these are social changes that happen once in a generation. They don't happen often. And they are the bedrock of society progress, as the Honorable Sadhguruji said, that unless you have equal society, you cannot expect progress because you will otherwise get social threats. And I think India is probably going to escape from that social threat, which the rest of the world is experiencing in a dramatic way right now. So that's social change, the first river that's flowing into the Triveni Sangam. The second river is economic change. So again, if you just reflect on the changes, and there have been many of them, so I'm not going to be touching upon every little change. I'm going to highlight 3 of them. The first change was with respect to supply side reform. So we have engineered major changes on the supply side. We have lowered corporate taxes, we have implemented GST, we have implemented the Real Estate Regulation Act, we have implemented the IBC, and we have enhanced our infrastructure. We actually did some work last week, which is still work in progress, but it showed that per capita infrastructure in India today is now ahead of China in many sectors, like airports, like railways, like, a little less so in the case of ports. But we have had dramatic shifts that have happened in a very short period of time in a long duration sector like infrastructure. So port turnaround times have reduced, the travel time on roads is reduced, therefore inventories in the pipeline have reduced. Business has become genuinely easy. I concur with Dr. Bala that it is not easy to do business in India, but it's a lot easier than it was 10 years ago. And I think all of you will agree with that. So the delta matters, even though the absolute level is still not satisfactory, and it should never be satisfactory. We should always strive for improvement, but I think we're getting there. Then, of course, all the tax law changes that have happened. We've seen the effect of GST. It has certainly reduced leakages in the system. It has probably reduced corruption. It has increased revenue collection for the government, which then makes it easier for the government to deliver services to citizens. It becomes easier for the government to ensure that there's greater equality in the system. And this idea about equality actually in economics is not a social concept. It's not coming out of socialism or communism. It actually came in the 1930s by a US economist by the name of Kenneth Arrow. So I don't know how many of you know about Kenneth Arrow, but he received a Nobel Prize for writing this piece about how capitalism can succeed, because capitalism invariably produces extreme outcomes. So very few number of people become very rich. The rest of the society gets left behind. I mean, this is the problem that communism was trying to solve and failed, because states tend to be corrupt and therefore communism failed. But capitalism, succeeds only, according to Kenneth Arrow's seminal paper, if governments can transfer money or transfer cash or in kind to the people left behind so that they have a chance in the race to becoming materially rich. And this is about if I am in a 100-meter dash against the world champion, there's no way I'm going to be able to win the race. If I get a 30-meter head start, I will still lose, but the race will become interesting. So that was the idea behind Kenneth Arrow. Now, government after government, country after country has tried to do this, has tried to distribute and undertake social transfers, but it's not been a very successful endeavor. Unintended consequences happen. The latest one in COVID, when the US government tried to help poor people who were getting affected by COVID because of loss of jobs and transferred $800 cash into their bank accounts every month. What they've been left with now is, rampant inflation, for which, the Fed has to raise interest rates at the fastest clip in almost 40 years. And who knows what that is going to now cause in the US economy. India, by the way, didn't go down that path because we had India Stack. So we actually transferred QR codes, which allowed poor people to encash in terms of grains rather than cash. In fact, I was privy to a conversation from a bureaucrat who said that the Prime Minister had met several experts just around the time of COVID. And, after those meetings had famously told the people in the government that, and this is, way back in March 2020, so imagine the insight that he got from something that was totally unknown. We had no idea what COVID was going to do to us. We only could guess, and even our best guesses were probably going to be wrong. And he had famously said that ये जो बीमारी है, ये अमीर की छाती पे वार है और गरीब की पेट पे लात है. तो हमें गरीबों को खाना देना है और अमीरों के लिए अस्पताल बनाना है. और यही करना है बस. लोग तो मरेंगे. वो तो हम जितने कम मरते हैं उतना अच्छा है. So this is the insight that he had, and that is why India has not had the inflation problem that the rest of the Western world particularly has been facing, because we actually had a much better system of social transfers. So social transfers, are important, and that is something that we have done very well. But this whole supply side reform is I think the basis for the improved growth rate that India is likely to experience. The second big change that has happened, this happened in 2015, and that was flexible inflation targeting. So if you go back to prior to 2015, the central bank in India did not have a mandate. It basically followed what the government of the day asked it to. So if the government of the day said, get me growth, the central bank would cut interest rates. If the government of the day said, control inflation, the central bank would raise rates. In 2015, the Prime Minister changed that. He said that the central bank should have only a single mandate, and the mandate should be to control inflation. And the target will be fixed by the Parliament. And the governor of the RBI will be answerable to the floor of the House if the RBI misses the target. This was a massive change in India's economic management. And this was coming out of the 2013 mini crisis that India faced, when all that Ben Bernanke, the then US Fed chair, had to say was taper, and the Indian currency was down 20% in a month. and stock markets were down 20%. And, there was almost a crisis that we faced, and we had to raise interest rates by 200 basis points overnight. And the reason was that India was running a twin deficit which was unmanageable. We were running an inflation rate that was well into double digits. So with that experience in the bag, I think this inflation targeting, which we actually introduced about 8 years ago, has been a very big shift for the country's economy. Now, the consequences of this is that we are running macro stability like we've never seen before. And macro stability in economics is essentially you have benign inflation and good growth rates. And as a result, you run a much lower deficit with the world. So if you look at our current account deficit, it's much more manageable because we don't have these imbalances that are there. And our currency actually, of course, a lot of you will look at it as a US dollar cross, but remember the US dollar is doing this. And India is actually faring very well against non-US dollar currencies because of the fact that we have pursued flexible inflation targeting. The third big change was what I term as the 401k moment for India. So way back in 1980, the US President Ronald Reagan allowed 401k plans, which were retirement plans for US employees, to invest in equities. Until then, 401k plans did not invest in equities. What happened in the subsequent 20 years was that US households invested massive sums of money into the US equity markets. And of course, the US equity market went through a big bull run. It formed the basis for the formation of many, many businesses. The entire tech ecosystem got created in that period because capital became a lot cheaper. Again, in 2015, for the first time in India's history, we allowed the retirement funds to invest in equities. So provident funds and national pension schemes started investing in equities. And that has formed the basis for a big shift in the allocation of household balance sheets. So if you go back to 2015, 5% of household balance sheets in India were in equities, 12% in gold, 50% in property, and the rest of it in fixed deposits and insurance and other fixed income securities. So imagine gold was 2.5 times more than equities. And gold is really a wasting asset. Yes, it may appreciate in value, but in fact, I don't even call gold an asset. To me, an asset is something that yields. A bond is an asset. It gives you a coupon. An equity is an asset. It gives you a dividend. Property is an asset. It gives you rent. Gold gives you nothing. It's just store of value. But there was great affinity in this country for store of value because we were always very nervous about our currency. We were nervous about inflation. And therefore, households in India tended to buy a lot of gold. And that was a wasting asset. It did not produce anything. It just sat there and did nothing for you. It stored value for sure, but it produced nothing. That has started to change now. And this is a huge shift in the productive dynamics of this country. Yes, we have very good demographics. We've always enjoyed good demographics, for the last 70, 80 years. We've had a young population. The population has been young for a really long time, but it's not yielded dividends in terms of growth or prosperity like economics would have predicted. In economics, demographic is a necessary factor for producing prosperity, but it's not sufficient. What you need to put on top of it is productivity. And that's the change. And in fact, what Dr. Bala spoke about is another dimension about productivity, is that if you lift the productivity in the government sector, and if you lift productivity in the social sector, and if you lift it in the private sector, you get a massive surge in productivity overlaid on strong demographics that India has. You basically generate much better growth. So I think we are set up for that now because of the change in which saving is happening in India, which is more productive saving is taking place with equity markets grabbing greater share of household balance sheets, which will then get funneled into startups, which will get funneled into risk enterprises, and that creates growth. So these are three big mega changes that have happened in economics. Again, as I said, there are so many of them. We've written a detailed report about how many changes have happened. I can't cover all of them, but I thought I'll focus on the top three. And then the third river that is joining this Triveni Sangam is politics. Now, as a nation, we've always been defensive. We've been subservient to, the colonial mindset. And, how can you blame this country? Because the colonial era was about destroying this country's foundations. And I tell this to a lot of people, especially, the younger generation in my office, who don't understand these things automatically. I said, think about Vastu Shastra. So, when somebody tells you about Vastu Shastra, you will say, oh, that's all superstition. I don't believe in it. But there's deep science embedded in it. Why should the master bedroom be southwest facing? It's a lot of science embedded there because India sits in the northern hemisphere. During summer, the sun is on the northern side, and therefore it is actually very warm. The bedroom, the main bedroom of the house should be on the southern side and on the southern western side because you don't want to be exposed to the rising sun. And then in the winter, the sun moves to the southern side when temperatures are much lower and you want the heat of the sun, which is what the master bedroom gets. This is a lot of science embedded which has been lost because the colonial Raj basically impressed upon us that these are superstitions that you need to abandon. And as a consequence, I think we lost a lot of our, a lot of the insights that our, ancient rishis produced. And, as I tell people, the Western world produces insights by observing the world from the outside. The insights in this country's ancient texts have all come from going inside. And I think the inside is far more powerful than the outside. And I cite Heisenberg's principle. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Heisenberg, but in the 1920s, he came up with Heisenberg's principle, which is, and it will sound very familiar to a lot of you, that the observed is distorted by the observer. Yeah, I think, somebody else said it in the Bhagavad Gita, right? Jagat mithya hai. Jagat mithya nahi hai. What you see is the problem because it is being distorted by the observer. And if that is the case, then Western science, is producing insights that, time and again get proven wrong. Newton said something about gravity and Einstein, disproved that. And today quantum physics is still struggling with the concept of gravity. So I think somewhere along the line, getting rid of that colonial mindset is something that's going to help India make that step forward. And I'm seeing those changes actually. I'm not a very big fan of social media. It's a huge distraction. I rather spend that time sitting alone with myself. But I do, track a few things because my yoga guru actually does classes on Instagram. And what I'm seeing on Instagram is the rejuvenation of ancient Indian science. A lot of those insights are now coming back. And hopefully younger generation in India regain that confidence that we actually can, deliver this and we are not subservient to any other class or any other society. So with these changes afoot, I think we should see a pretty big shift in India's progress as a nation, particularly relative to the world. Now, I'll spend a few minutes on the world because the world is looking very messy. And this is a problem for India because at a time when we are becoming Atmanirbhar, and Atmanirbhar is being wrongly interpreted by people as inward. It's not inward, it's self-reliance. There's a big difference between inward-looking economy and self-reliant economy. A self-reliant economy will trade a lot more with the world. But the world is not looking good. The world is not looking good because the world is challenged by 4 Ds. The first is demographics. It's aging rapidly. Even America has aged in the last 10 years, like it hasn't in the previous 2 or 3 decades. China's population, as I said, is already declining. Japan is already in the 50s. And, as my erstwhile economist, Morgan Stanley economist Steve Roach used to say, Europe is an open-air museum. because it's got a lot of old people. So, the world is aging, and therefore it's going to be hard for the world to grow. On top of it, it's also ridden with a lot of debt. So what is debt? Basically, debt is spending your future. When you borrow money, you've just spent your future, because now your future income will be used to pay down that debt. The world has largely spent away its future. America sits on 200% private debt to GDP. China sits on 220% private debt to GDP. Europe sits at somewhere between 180 and 250%. They've all consumed their future. India, by the way, sits at 58%. We yet to consume it, though I keep telling people that the next 2 generations are going to spend their future away. Because I think we have learned that it's a nice thing to do, which is you can consume a lot more if you borrow money. And hopefully they are listening to Sadhguruji and not going to do that. But unfortunately, we will do that. The upshot is that in the next 2 generations, we'll experience very good growth. The downside is that beyond that, we will be in a similar situation. So I'll keep my fingers crossed. But that's the world. The second problem the world is facing is deglobalization. So, we've had 4 or 5 decades of globalization. Everybody trusted each other, traded well. Now a lot of distrust is arising. And this is particularly true between India and China. Between the US and China. And as a consequence, we're going to deglobalize. Now that has consequences on trade. It has implications on a lot of things. And I'll come to that in a moment. The third thing that is happening is digitalization. Every business needs to invest in digital infrastructure. And that's going to cost money, it's going to be expensive, and it's a disruption. And the fourth is decarbonization. Now, unfortunately, we have spent 5 million years of fossil fuel creation in 200 years. So we've released a lot of carbon dioxide, and that is obviously creating some problems. Now, I just hope that the solutions that are being presented in the world are sensible, because the other day, and I didn't read the details in the article, but I read something like NASA is talking about blocking the sun. And that's an outright disaster. Listen, the sun, in Ayurveda, this is again, Western nutrition science is totally wrong about everything. Okay, so they're changing their views, and guess what? It's basically reflecting what Ayurveda has anyway been saying for thousands of years. So in Ayurveda, the thing is that your meals should follow the sun. So when the sun rises, you should have a light meal, because the Agni, the Jathar Agni has still not awakened. Then when the sun is at the top, which is noon, that has to be your biggest meal, because the Jathar Agni is all on fire, the sun is contributing, and then the sun fades away, and hopefully, and you should not eat after sunset. Today I will be breaking that rule, but I generally don't eat after sunset. Though I did feed myself, just before this, so that I have to eat less. But the cycle of the sun is so critical to life on this planet, and blocking the sun, I hope we don't go down that path. But anyway, decarbonization is a challenge. India is ironically benefiting from all these 4. So demographics, not a problem. 27 years median age. We'll be young for a long, long time to come, long after this entire audience has left this planet. Deglobalization, I was just telling Lan earlier this evening that I have met more CEOs of multinational companies in the last 6 months than I had met in the preceding 20 years. Everybody wants to come to India to set up production. And we've written a lot of research around this. We just wrote about the electronics sector and we wrote about Apple. Apple is going to invest and make a lot more phones in India, because they all have the need and the force to leave China. The US may end up legislating against tech companies in the US investing in China incrementally. And therefore, India is going to be the favored destination. There's another reason which I'll come to a little later why India is going to be the favored destination. But one of the reasons is the multipolar world, which we are moving towards, where production needs to get diversified. Then decarbonization. India is another big beneficiary. Why? Because unlike the Western world, and to some extent China, our energy consumption is still very low. So yeah, I have given this statistic earlier, so some of you may have heard this. The average American consumes 9,000 watts of energy every day. That is more than the light that is there in this room. I think if you combine the air conditioning, then it's about the amount of energy that this room has consumed in the, imagine one American, okay? That's about what 5 male African elephants would consume in the African jungles in a single day in terms of food. That's what the average American consumes. The average per capita daily consumption of energy in India is 800 watts. In fact, if you add food, this is without food, the American average goes to 9,500. And by the way, human beings cannot eat 500 watts of food. Even if you're really obese, you could probably consume 300 watts. Normal people like us will probably be eating 200 watts of food a day. What happens to the rest? Well, it goes into the bin. And I joke about this, that if Americans and Europeans stop wasting food, the world's climate change problem will be resolved. Because so much of energy will get saved. Food is the modern food. Not food, I should say. Modern food is the biggest consumer of energy. Imagine if you are drinking a water bottle, the amount of energy that that bottle consumes in bringing that water to your table is actually criminal. So modern food industry is a huge guzzler of energy. The 800 watts in India is going to go up. Because another thing that we have achieved in the last 10 years is electricity to every village. So in India, the problem was we didn't have access to energy. A lot of our people did not have access to energy. If you didn't have access, you could not consume it. Now we have access. So we're going to consume. So 800 will probably double in the next 10, 12 years. And therefore, we can afford decarbonization because all we have to do to our existing fossil fuel capacity is add renewables. We don't have to destroy anything. Germany, the US, UK will all have to destroy existing fossil fuel capacity in order to meet COP26 targets. That entails a massive amount of capital loss, and you want to understand what that means if you have to destroy existing operational capacity in order to create new capacity that meets new regulations. So that's decarbonization. And then digitalization, India is already a few steps ahead of the world because of India's stack. So I will not go into that in greater detail. So the world is a mess. That's our biggest problem. We have to trade more with a messy world. And from time to time, that may impede some of the progress that we intend to achieve. China was a lot luckier because China was growing at a time when the world was doing very well. It was still leveraging up. It is still not aged. That's not something that we will benefit from. So in conclusion, I'm going to say 5 things that you need to look forward to. And Smita was telling me that some of you wanted to know where the equity markets are going. And we'll find out that later. But the 5 big picture conclusions, these are far more important than knowing where the equity markets are going. Because investing is about 2 things. It's about time and confidence. So not false confidence, but just adequate confidence and time. So if you have time on your side and if you have confidence, I think you will succeed. So my job here is to create that confidence. Your job is to bring the time. I cannot bring the time for you. Time means you have to be patient. Most of us want fast money, and that is, the death knell of creating wealth. You have to be very patient to create wealth. Wealth of any form, spiritual, material, all of it requires patience. It doesn't come quickly. There's no quick fix in the world. So the 5 things that you should take home. The first is India's growth rate, in my view, will be around 7%. We could grow faster. And I think Dr. Bala's work will be, one big contribution to that. In fact, people ask me that if the current regime comes back for another 5 years, what's left to do? Well, there are 2 big things left to do. One is bureaucratic reforms, which is what he's working on, and the other is judicial reform. We do have laws, but, actually getting them resolved in the court, everybody knows is a very painful and a very long-drawn process. So it's as good as not having laws. So hopefully we will build greater capacity there, and then our growth can go higher. If we actually strive to push our growth higher before capacity is built, we will run into problems. We did briefly run into a problem end of the first decade of this millennium, when we grew at 8.75%, which was well above our potential, and it left us with a lot of inflation to deal with. So we should not be in a hurry. We need more capacity, and really this is not about infrastructure capacity. This is about bureaucrat capacity. This is about judicial capacity. It's actually a multi-sectoral issue. It's not a mere infrastructure. Infrastructure, by the way, will get built. I am not so confident about judicial and bureaucrat capacity. So I was very enthused to see your presentation that, a lot of steps are being taken in that direction. So that's growth. So 7% is, by the way, a very good number, because if you add an inflation rate of 3 to 4%, you get nominal growth of 10, 11%. And compounding at 10, 11%, India, as people are forecasting, will be, and we are also forecasting, will be top 3, output countries in the world in the next 5 years, and we'll probably go to top 2 in the next 30, 40 years. So we'll get there just by the virtue of compounding at that rate. The world is not compounding at that rate. The second thing is that our share of global trade will rise. Now, one of the biggest failures for us has been that we have not been able to grow our trade with the world. We've done very well in services. In services, we were at 0% 30 years ago. Today, we are at pre-COVID, we were at 3.5. Today, we are at 4.7. One of the silver linings of COVID was that multinational company CEOs realized that it's okay to work from home. And if you're working from home, you might as well work in Bangalore rather than Florida. It's damn cheap to be in Bangalore. So multinational companies have created almost 1 million non-IT services jobs in the last 2 years. So I know everybody looks at IT services, but look at non-IT services. Massive job creation happening there because of the offshoring of jobs to India. So our share in global services trade has gone to 4.7%. It's risen by more than 1% in a matter of 2 years. And net services exports, by the way, have doubled in the last 2 years. So we will gain share in global trade. I think the same story is now about to happen in manufactured goods. We've just come out, after stagnating for 10 years at 1.7%, we're now at 1.9% of global trade in manufactured goods. And I think these numbers will probably more than double in the next 10 years. So all of you should be thinking about that when you're framing your business model. And why is it important to trade? Remember, from a macroeconomic perspective, it's very important. And I'll give you a very simple example. When a poor person trades with a poor person, there is no transfer of terms of trade. In economics, we call it terms of trade, which is you get no pricing power. A poor person cannot pay more. But when a poor person trades with a rich person, a transfer of trade, terms of trade happens, which is that pricing power comes. This is exactly how India got impoverished. We transferred terms of trade for 300 years to the rest of the world, starting the 17th century all the way to the 20th century. That's why all these people got attracted to India, because we were so rich that trading with us meant we could, those who were trading with us could become richer. And that's exactly what happened. Now it's time for us to reverse this. Now we start trading with the world and transfer some of that lost or stolen wealth back to our country. So that's the second thing. The third thing that is of importance is how the consumption in this country is set to change. So our income pyramid sits somewhat like this. We have a lot of poor people at the bottom, tons of poor people. The last that I had estimated, there are probably 400 million people in this country who will not get a meal tonight. They'll not get a meal to eat. It's a very poor country. Okay? So we are outliers, extreme outliers. We don't represent this country at all. This country is very poor. It has to be, right? At $2,300 average per capita income, you're dealing with a lot of people below poverty line. And that is set to change. It's already changing, actually. In fact, it has changed in the last 5 years, and it's going to change dramatically in the next 5 years. The income pyramid, which is somewhat like this, and we have about 5 million households that are rich by global standards at the top of the pyramid, that is actually going like this. The bottom layer is going to shrink, the top layer is going to expand. The top layer, I estimate, is going to go from 5 million to 25 million, which means we will add 2 crore new families or people who are rich by global standards. Nowhere else on the planet are that many rich people coming into any country over the next 10 years. And this is why Apple, Louis Vuitton, BMW, Mercedes, and you name it, all of them want to set up shop in India because this is going to be their biggest market in the next 10 years, and in fact beyond that as well. So that's consumption. Again, when you're thinking about your business, think about how this is going to impact you because a lot of things will change. That bottom layer there today is essentially spending bulk of its income on roti kapda makan. They will now generate income to spend on things other than that, which includes sending kids to school, which includes going for a vacation, painting your home, buying a tractor, buying an internet connection, buying a phone, and so on. So that is a phenomenal change that is underway already, actually, right? And it will actually gain momentum in the next 10 years. So that's the third thing. The fourth thing to note is our balance of payments. So we as a country have been subject to the vagaries of global economic cycles because of our requirement to get dollars or foreign exchange currency. Now that is about to change. I explained to you why the current account deficit is looking more benign with the services export boom, with our manufactured goods exports that are about to happen. And on top of it, with all this investment flow that's taking place, so multinational companies, private equity firms, and foreign portfolio investors all looking to buy Indian assets, we're probably going to run BOP surpluses in the foreseeable future, which is a good problem to have. It's still a problem, but it's a good problem to have. It's better than not having the money. We are going to have excess supply of dollars and other currencies, and with all these rupee trades that the government is signing up, this problem is only becoming, the good problem is becoming even bigger because a lot of countries will trade with us in rupees, and therefore we will be spending less dollars on trading with them, notably the United Arab Emirates, Russia, and a few more such deals are getting inked. So these are far-reaching changes on the country's balance sheet. So the country's balance sheet is looking better. Now this will have implication on your business because we're all used to a certain level of rupee depreciation year after year after year after year. That rate of depreciation is going to slow. It will still depreciate because we still have a productivity gap with the world which is negative. So our productivity is less than the world, so the rupee still needs to depreciate, but the pace of depreciation is going to slow. So when you're building your business, think about that. You're not going to get easy returns from rupee depreciation. It's going to become harder as time passes over the next 10, 15 years. And the final thing is that we are in the midst of a profit boom. The government is very clear. It wants companies to make money. It wants firms to make money because only when firms make money, they can invest. Only when they invest, you get job creation. Only when you get job creation, you get all-round prosperity. So it's a different mindset from the 7 decades of socialist economic behavior that we've suffered as a country. And that is obviously good for entrepreneurs. I wrote about this way back in 2015. It was a note titled Time for Entrepreneurship. And I stick to that 8 years later. I think we're in a very sweet spot for entrepreneurship, and that may sustain for several years to come. So those are the 5 big things that you should take away. And then its implication on the stock market should be fairly obvious. India has been amongst the best performing stock markets in the world over the past 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years. Over 25 years, it has beaten the US stock markets in US dollar terms. And I think we may continue to do that over the next 5, 10, 15, 20. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You had in your presentation taken us through the Triveni Sangam, but little did you realize we actually had our own Triveni Sangam here this evening, 3 powerful speakers, and the immense knowledge they shared here has something for each of us to take home. And what better when it is blessed by Sadhguru himself. I'm sure most of you either have umpteen number of questions or are just hungry. So I'm going to fulfill the first one. This calls for a panel discussion. We've taken questions from you all earlier and had given us to take us through the questions. To take us through the panel discussion, we have Smita Ramakrishnan amongst us, who is the CEO of MCA Consulting. Apart from being a chartered accountant and a management graduate, she's an organizational development expert with over 20 years of experience in strategy development, financial management, and leadership. She's been a speaker at prestigious entrepreneurship events and a visiting faculty at premier management institutes in India. Smita, you have the toughest job. Over to you. I also request T.N. Manoharan sir, Balu sir, and Rhythm Desai to kindly take their seats on the stage. Over to you, Smita.
Thank you. Thank you, Anaga. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening again to our esteemed guests tonight. It's been an absolute delight listening to our speakers this evening. The depth, the range, the coverage has made an entire fascinating journey to the making of New India. Now we move this lovely evening to a session where we delve a little closer, linger a little longer on what were the discussion points of this evening. The questions have been ignited by the speeches tonight, the profile of our speakers, and our overwhelming contribution by our audience tonight. May not have been able to accommodate all the questions, but most of them will find a mention in spirit, if not in letter. Let's begin by looking into the future. I quote, "I often tell my daughter, when I am gone, by the time I am gone, she will be living in the world's richest country," unquote. Rhythm, that's a very nice picture to paint for your daughter.
She does not believe me, by the way.
For us to look at this country, which is 75 plus years old, mocked with a Hindu rate of growth, being 12th at some point in time in the world economy, and now poised to take off, and how? A recent Goldman Sachs report pegged 2075 to be the time when India is going to overtake the US and be the second largest economy in the world. How are we going to sustain? The duration is long, the catch-up is tough. Rhythm, can you tell us, how is this going to be able to sustain for this duration? The government has of late been started mentioning durable growth, adding that word durable to growth. This really requires to be durable. What do you say about sustaining this?
Yeah, absolutely. So one small correction. Let's not refer it to the Hindu rate of growth. That was the socialist rate of growth.
At one point it was written, so I'm just using what was.
Yeah, because it had nothing to do with Hindu. But anyway, yeah, that's one of the, unfortunate things that have happened, that we have labeled things wrongly. But I think, as I mentioned, 7% growth is a sustainable number. And I'll explain to you how we arrive at that. So there's a science behind it. It doesn't come out of thin air. So growth is a function of the investments one makes. And in fact, growth in any sphere of life is a function of investments. Okay. So if you sit and meditate longer, you will grow spiritually. If you invest in your businesses, you will grow that business. But there is another thing involved in that. Just investing is not going to yield growth. You also need productivity. Okay, so in macroeconomics, productivity is called as, the phrase we use is incremental capital output ratio, which is how much of capital I have to put in order to achieve 1 unit of growth. So that measured number in India has been around 4.2. And this is the number that we need to improve. It has to reduce. That means you need lesser amount of capital. So maybe we'll get to 3.5. But today we are at around 4.
3.5 last one I saw that. You're right.
Yeah, but we're on a sustainable basis, we are at 4. How does that improve? By building capacity. So when you create capacity, you improve your productivity and then the ICOR falls down. But today our investment rate is around 28-30%. ICOR is 4.2. When you divide the two, you get sustainable growth, which is 7%. So that is the steady state number today. It may change in the future. Right. By the way, you cannot raise investments endlessly. Okay, China took its investment rate to 50% at its peak, and China's ICOR fell a lot more. And therefore, it was able to generate 10% GDP growth for 15 years on the trot. I don't think we will be able to do that. The reason is that in order to take investment rate that higher, you have to sacrifice other things. Okay, so investment rate cannot just go up for free. You have to sacrifice consumption, you have to sacrifice other things. So on a steady state basis, I think it is fair to assume that we will have 30% investment rate, an ICOR of maybe 4. Then we get to 7.5% growth. If we can improve our capital productivity or total productivity, then we can improve our growth rate and probably go to 8. So that is something which Dr. Bala is trying to do and other people are trying to do, is build capacity. So that will improve productivity. But that's how we arrive. And then if you compound at that rate, the natural outcome is that we will get there. Now the foundation to this is demographics. We have young people, and it is important to have young people because young people are the ones who work. The economic technical term is dependency ratio. You have to have fewer dependents. Now dependents are of two types: old people and young people, which is kid going. We have about 50 crore people in this country who are under the age of 16. At no point in world history has any country had 50 crore people who are not adults, okay, under the age of 18, sorry. So it's phenomenal. But we are supporting both these constituencies. The 15 crore people who are above the age of 60 and the 50 crore. Now the 50 crore will keep reducing, and that is what will drive our growth rate. And as I said, our fertility rate has dropped. So we're going to produce fewer kids going into the next 10, 20, 30 years. And the kids are going to join our workforce. And therefore, that's how I think this plays out. Now, of course, there are overarching assumptions here, many assumptions, right? We don't go to war. We don't get into a fight with China. We don't get into, we don't get into a world crisis. Okay, we don't get into World War III. We have stable politics in this country. So many assumptions. But I think the audience will be familiar. We'll come to that a little later.
Yeah, my follow-up question for that was this. I was going to open up to all the three of you. What are the red flags to watch out for? What are the risks that when we talk about durable growth, when we talk about this long-term sustainable growth and overtaking US kind of a vision, what is that red flags and risks that we need to quickly watch out and be able to stall it or correct it immediately? What do we think is?
So on the immediate term, I think it's 2024 general elections. Okay, there is there is no guarantee when 1 billion eligible voters, of which 700 million will turn up at the polling booths to vote, that we will generate a majority government. Okay, so there's always a chance that we will not get one. And that could derail us. So that's the immediate risk. The medium-term risk is that we fail to build capacity in judiciary and bureaucracy. Because I think that that is going to become increasingly important as we become bigger as a nation. And the long-term risk, I think, is agriculture. You see, today we have about 25 crore farmers in India. Okay, half our workforce does farming. They produce 15% of India's output. Okay, so half the workforce produces 15%, which means they are 1/6 as productive as the remaining 50%. And they work on very marginal farm plots. The average, farm, we have about 137 million farmers who are landowners, and they own about, 350 million acres of land. So the average ownership is about 2.5 acres. Half the farmers own plots which are less than 1 acre. On a 1 acre plot, you cannot have any scientific inputs. You cannot put, superior seeds, you cannot put tractors, you cannot bring irrigation water. I mean, the reason why in India irrigation does not have much more scope is because of fragmented land ownership. Now, the Prime Minister did try to change this, but, we have not been able to pass laws, and farming is a state subject. So, there are some constitutional impediments here. I do see this as a long-term problem because, this is the poorest section of Indian society, and it's the one that has got great promise. I've done a rough calculation. If India produced at US productivity levels in agriculture, our farm sector will be worth 80% of our current GDP.
Right.
Okay.
Wow, okay. That's something.
Yeah, we're not even forecasting that because we don't think we're getting there, but that could be, one risk factor which we have to deal with.
I would possibly look at it slightly differently. I'm a little more optimistic about the bureaucracy at least. But I think there are other challenges. As a nation, we're going to be challenged by increasing urbanization.
Okay.
And the way in which we're managing our urbanization. We're not really focusing on a strategic investment on managing urbanization the way we should. And we're seeing floods today. It's not just climate change. It's also bad urban management that's not giving us the bandwidth to manage all those things. The two bigger things as I work, and when I did the root cause analysis of the national infrastructure pipeline, I realized that the handicap in the state are two very glaring things: project management skills and contract management. The inability to understand contract management is a big challenge. And now we have taking care of that. But that said, like what Rhythm said, judiciary is a completely different ballgame. And since I can't talk about it, I'm not going to talk about it. But bureaucratic reforms is definitely going to happen. The third thing is we are still an urban economic engine-driven system. We are not focusing on the power and potential of rural microeconomic clusters. And now we've got the Vishwakarma scheme in this budget, which is making a huge shift. There's doubling farming incomes. All those are they're all band-aid solutions for now, but we need to have long-term strategic interventions that doesn't look at rural India as just recipients of largis, but sees them as participants in economic growth. Like if you take Karnataka, we're sitting in Bangalore, 78-80% of the GSDP of the state comes from Karnataka. But what people don't tell you is 60% of power consumption is the district of Bangalore. So there's such inequities in terms of infrastructural support from state-supported mechanisms for rural India is going to be a real stumbling block for us. And that's a matter of concern. And the last is any capacity of any state to do well is not just bureaucracy. It's also the private sector. I think we simply have presumed in our country private sector is efficient, private sector has got integrity, it's only the public sector that's got corruption issues. I don't agree. I've been 5 years Karnataka's Lokayukta. And I can tell you stories of both sides. It's just a reality. So our weak governance structures, which are not catching up with the kind of growth that the private sector is throwing up, is a reality. I see an opportunity too. Social stock exchange that we are looking at is an opportunity for this country. And it's 4 years since it was announced. It's been 3 months since we formed the exchanges. But getting the traction, the interest, and the fate of the private sector in social returns is sort of, I am figuring out what to do, but maybe I'll have a chat with them later. So I think it's all. The last point I want to make is we haven't invested in higher education the way we should have. Now we are opening up. We're starting new universities, but we don't have the faculty for these universities. We're starting universities, but where are the people to teach? Luckily for us, there's a, I look at it as a forward step. A lot of people in my place look at it as a backward step, is in opening up higher education to outside the world. You know, other players to come into our country, I think it will do good. And coupled with interventions which the private sector can encash, like whether it's Gati Shakti or whether it is quantum computing investments that we're going to make, or even things like green hydrogen and all the kind of space economy opportunities that are opening up. State can only do that much. But the talent has to be from the private sector to capitalize on this. And I'm not sure private sector is focusing on these opening up of opportunities, including the National Research Fund, which today the Prime Minister said it's going to come in this session of Parliament itself, the Act, which is a huge thing. I think these are opportunities. If private sector doesn't read the writing properly, I think we're going to lose, because nobody else can do it. They have to join.
Thanks for that. I was going to go to the China topic rhythm like we discussed, but I will come back in the end if time permitting. This is to Manoharan sir. Sir, on corporate governance, the corporate world has been rocked with incidences of late, continues to get rocked. The Indian booming startup world is under the seeing headwinds now with Byju's, the BharatPays. The established players like TCS and Adani have their time under the scanners too of late. One important thing for sustainable economic growth is good governance. Capital allocation follows good governance. We are seeing influx of capital into India, but good governance will have to be a frame under that. Do we think we have done enough, especially unlisted companies, governance of unlisted companies? What is the need of the hour?
Yeah. Actually, India is not known as just India globally. It is known as Incredible India. Because there is no country which can match in terms of its natural wealth and you call anything, monuments, forests, mountains, valleys, snow, desert, all rivers, backwaters, everything in one nation, it stands out. So it is an incredible India. But what we need to do is build a credible economy in this incredible India. How to build the credible economy, like what you asked. All these governance things, there is a tendency that it can be fixed by knee-jerk reaction of legislating for the exception. That, I think, of course, it is coming down in the present regime, but it has to be curtailed further, because when you legislate for the exception, the law becomes more complex. And the cost of compliance increases. And who gets affected is the ones who are otherwise genuinely complying with the laws. So let me give an anecdote. There was a train accident. The train was going at a considerable pace. Suddenly it derailed and ran into a paddy field for 200 feet and managed to stop, but after injuring many passengers. Inquiry commission was constituted. The commission summoned the driver and asked what happened. He said, I was going at so-and-so speed. Suddenly there was an intruder on the track. The panel got wild. Don't you know that life of one intruder is not important? Considering the safety of all the hundreds of passengers you were carrying, you should have run over the intruder. Driver said, with 27 years of experience, do you think I don't know this? I wanted to run over him, but he started running into the paddy field, so what can I do? Lawmakers are following those who are violating the law and accordingly trying to tinker with the law, thinking that that will prevent him, that will catch him and all. Actually, that is not the solution. It actually affects the genuine players in the market. And the right solution is expeditious investigation and severe punishment will send a positive signal to the rest of the world. For example, if I can take 1 minute more, Madoff happened in June 2008. Satyam happened in January 2009. Madoff inquiry, investigation, trial, everything was completed by July 2009 in 13 months. And judgment was pronounced. He was in the accused box. The judge was pronouncing 150 years of rigorous imprisonment. Madoff said, I mean, spontaneously said, "Milords, I am already 70-year-old." Judge said, "Do your best." To the extent possible. Judge also knows this 150 years is not for Mr. Madoff. It is for those who want to defraud the society. Convey the message, this is what awaits you if you attempt to do this. That is missing in our country. I think that is what we'll have to pick it up. Like when we turned around Satyam, Wall Street Journal wrote, America should learn from India how to handle a corporate crisis. But we should learn these things on expeditious investigation, sending a stringent punishment so that nobody can take it for granted. I can do anything and get away with it. I can prolong it. Maybe Ramalinga Raju also confessed, because if you confess, the local authorities will take you into the jail and release you on bail. You can start half a dozen new ventures without knowing when the verdict is going to come. Whereas if you are deported to US because you are listed in New York, the whole asset will be confiscated and you would have been by then announced for rigorous imprisonment, unable to see the rest of your life outside the jail. You know, this is what I feel needs to be set right.
All right, nice. When we talk about governance, moving on to Dr. Balu, you've said governance is a fashion statement in the world today in one of your talks, I remember. I come to this topic which is on most of our minds when we talk governance and public service. Corruption. On the corruption index, we are 85th. India is ranked 85th in the nations of 180. It is something tangible for all our lives when we look at governance and civil services. How do we tame this? What are the systemic and cultural issues over here?
I think most of us sort of equate corruption to only public sector. I think it's a societal crisis. Let's first reconcile to that. It is what we all are. Corruption is actually two kinds. One is collusive corruption, one is coercive corruption. Collusive corruption, for all our understanding, is the signal is red, I don't stop. The policeman catches me, he and I collude and I give him 10 rupees and go away. Instead of paying the 25 rupee fine, we are colluding together. So there is no victim there. The spectrum scam that we had. Both of us collude and he takes a spectrum, I give him, nobody loses. There's nobody to even be a whistleblower or a complainant. There's no victim. In coercive scam, I'm a poor Dalit farmer. My son gets a medical college seat. I go to the Tahsildar and say, give me a caste certificate because I'd give it. He says, okay, son got a medical college seat. You give me 5,000 rupees, I'll give the certificate. This guy doesn't want to participate in the corruption, but he sells his cow, curses the Tahsildar, but he knows he can't complain because Tahsildar is not going to get transferred, the system is not going to act against him, he will get penalized. He's coerced to participate in the corrupt system. In India, strangely, unlike the rest of the world, 80% of our corruption is collusive. We together join hands to defraud. You build a house in Bangalore, the zoning law says 5 feet in front, 3 feet on all sides. How many of us give 5 feet in the front? We'll do 4.5, 4, depending on the revenue inspector. And then the revenue inspector comes and asks, you built extra, give me 5,000 rupee fine. We'll tell how corrupt that fellow is. We are the fellows who built that 1 foot extra, no? So we as a nation suffer from this problem. GST, 1.6 lakh crore annual monthly correction. Do you know how much the officers, I think you will know, in the CBIC are struggling to understand where is the leakage between 10 to 25% happening because of all the systems that people like you sitting in this room are creating for your companies or for shell companies. The government is not patronizing it. The system has abused it and it's creating, looking what I think you said in your talk, how you look for the, and so I think it's a national disease. So let's not run away from this problem. Each of us have learned to become corrupt in the system and then we blame the system. I think it's like Bangalorean. Sitting in Bangalore, I can make this comment. We are stuck in a traffic jam and we all criticize Bangalore traffic. But we forget that we are the ones driving the car in the first place. Right? So my view is, you want good governance, you be a good citizen first. And then you demand it will work. Otherwise, you don't have a right to do so. But that being said, I can tell you with a lot of confidence, at least nationally, I wouldn't say, I'm in a state where I don't want to say anything. Things are extraordinarily good. It's very difficult to be corrupt in Delhi. It's not the same about the rest of the country. That's all I will say.
we have an audience of a lot of private players. The PM, when was talking about capacity building, he also lauded the private sector for its efficiency and technology. And public-private partnership has been an integral part of a lot of schemes of government, be it the National Monetization Pipeline, Gati Shakti, and everything. How do you see this panning out for the audience come from private sector? How do you think, and how should this collaborate and be taken to fully utilize the values from it?
I think it stems from a very deep paradigmatic thinking of the Prime Minister of less government, more governance. And there is a lot of private sector efficiency in the system because your bottom lines are driven by efficiency. Otherwise, you can't make the money you have to make. So public sector is essentially driven by social good. And therefore, being a monopolistic structure, the government, we can afford to be inefficient because there's nobody else who's going to replace us. So it's changing. Now, government is exiting from businesses it should not be in the business of, but it's not abdicating the governance needs that it is to be part of. And a lot of areas where we see a win-win opportunity is when these things are coming together. I'll give a few examples. The challenge that we had for the government was not understanding private sector. It is not, I'm not even getting into the micro details of how do you design a PPP. There are a lot of challenges in that. But the simplest thing was the government forming regulations and policies doesn't even know the private sector. So I actually had in the commission, we had a very interesting last 8 months of learning. We had officials of Civil Aviation Ministry. Air India was sold. The entire division running Air India in the ministry had no job to do. But they never knew anything else. They only knew how to run Air India. Not that they did it well, and then we realized people don't understand that Indian government has itself passed rules and regulations patronizing private airports, private airlines. And these guys have no idea how private airlines fly. So the top 200 people in the ministries are actually small. They work for 15 days in AirAsia, in Vistara, in Delhi airport, in Bangalore airport, in a failing airport like Kozhikode airport, just to understand how it operates. And they then realize, oh my God, we are making policies for people whom we know nothing about. And then they said, we are going to make better. And I don't want to elaborate this example. I don't know anybody from the airline industry here, but to get an airport entry pass for your employee, it's a long process. And the aviation fuel and pilots are the most expensive for an airline. And we realized some 30, 40 years ago, somebody, or just when private sector was entering into airline space, somebody decided that we should make it so difficult to give all the private players airport entry passes that Air India will continue with its inefficient functioning. So if you don't, your pass you only get a 6-month pass. The pilot of the airline gets a 6-month pass to enter the airport without a problem. And you have to apply 1 month before. And the committee meets, I don't know why, in Chennai. And if the chairman that morning feels, Manoharan feels, I'm a little headache today, so I'll not meet today, it goes to next month. But your pilot gets de-rostered. And re-rostering is a big complicated process from DGSCA. And the undersecretary felt, oh my God, what am I doing? I'm costing a lot of loss to a private airline by simply not getting it done. They came back, it doesn't need cabinet. It just needed an undersecretary to decide to put up the paper to get sanctions. It's online today. They don't have to ever wait at all. We started doing this. We sent our coal ministry into the mines. We sent our ports to go to Mumbai Port Trust people to go visit Adani Port and say how with 1/10 the labor, they're doing 10 times the cargo management. We sent our shipping ministry to understand private. So we are now getting them to learn from private sector. First, get exposed, get sensitized. And then when Sunil Bhaskaran was the MD of AirAsia, he told me something fascinating. He said, Balu, you have done all this. I have a request to make. I said, what? He said, can I send 25 of my top executives from AirAsia to come and work for a week in Civil Aviation Ministry? We need to understand government better. So I think public-private partnership is not a project you run. It starts off with respecting each other's boundaries, respecting each other's strengths, and having the common connection and the will to say together we'll make a difference. That's how I would say a PPP.
A related point on that, Dr. Balu, the lateral entry into the civil forces. I'm sure many aspirants would like to listen in, present in the crowd would like to know about that. It was started, I think, in 2018, and only 38 positions, I hear, till 2022 have been filled through lateral entry. Is that pace okay? You mentioned we're functioning with a severe deficit of human resource also. How do you see that panning out, and what is that in it for the audience tonight?
You decided to put me in a spot continuously, but I think that's one of the fascinating experiments that's happening with political conviction but bureaucratic hesitation. It's going to be true. Like, will any of you offer me a job of a CHRO of your company tomorrow? Because I have managed a large number of people. We always say that this is private sector. What do you know of? What do you know of? You know of government a lot, no, but what do you know of private sector? You come from civil society. What do you know of our agent? The government had the courage to put me there, right? So first experiment was 9 people joined at the level of joint secretaries to government. 1 didn't join, only 8 joined, 1 dropped out, 7 continued. And I'm not saying it was because of him, it was also because he was there in the system. Amber Dubey was a joint secretary in civil aviation. He came from private sector, and he worked with the top-class bureaucrat. Carola was from Karnataka's cadre, and Air India was sold on the last day of Carola's term. It is because the team worked well. But lateral entrants are a threat. We take lateral entrants because we want specialized skill to enter laterally into the system. We don't have the time and the capacity to build for our system to grow into that. We're sorting it out. We'll structurally sort it out at some point of time. But we need lateral entrants. So government is deeply committed to it. After this 9 experiment, we had 31 people come in at different levels, right from deputy secretary to joint secretary. We have just announced in UPSC the next generation of people coming in. Right now, I'm doing a research for my team on the impact of lateral entry and what could be done to make it better. There are challenges. Accountability. I screw up in government today. What's going to happen to me after my term is over? I'm just coming back to my forest and going to go back to life as usual. But an existing government employed person screws up, he can go to jail. He cannot get his pension. He'll be in such horrendous things. So accountability structures are not well thought through. So right now we are cleaning it up. We want talent inside. We are also thinking of something fascinating. Maybe at some point of time lateral exits. And UK's bureaucracy has actually said 33% of United Kingdom, who's what we're imitating today, the past of theirs we're imitating today, are temporary employees. They just come 2 days, 3 days to government of UK, work and go back. And the research shows the cross-pollination on a real-time basis of public-private sector knowledge that's happening is enhanced not private sector, but the public sector of UK. So we are looking at a lot of experiments. Maybe I'm not as, I wouldn't say less hopeful, or I'm more confident that we will have the government for the next 5 years, a stable government for the next 5 years. And if not for anything else, we needed to make sure that these things which are started, the political capital to walk the talk, I don't see anybody else having. And so all this will fall in place. So I think if people are interested, they should apply. And if you can help us make the system better with all the collective knowledge in this room, I'll be very happy to learn about it.
India is a vast, diverse country. Any growth measures can easily get fragmented by region, politics, ideology. We have seen policy reversals. We've seen development focus getting reversed when regime changes happen. For the making of this new India, for it to sustain and for it to be durable, what does this mean? What is this big risk? And what is that factor that will see a unified effort, a unidirectional, sustained effort? Yeah, it's for all of you.
So, we are a democracy, okay, and governments will have to come to the electorate every 5 years, and that's the reality, and they can change. I'm not predicting a minority government, just to clarify. No, I'm not predicting one, I'm just saying it's a risk. It's a risk of being in a democracy, in a well-functioning... Yeah, no, well-functioning democracy. I mean, much of this criticism that India faces in the Western press, the fact is that, Karnataka saw a change in government. Okay, so if it was not a well-functioning democracy, that wouldn't have happened, right? And it's not like the incumbent is winning every election. They lose some, they win some. So that only happens in an electorate that, in a democratic system that works. So I think that's a risk that we carry on. That said, as I said in my Triveni Sangam, a few things have left, as I say, कि घोड़ा तबेले से बाहर निकल गया है. The horse has left the stable. Now that horse is not coming back. So some of these changes are irreversible. Some of them are still subject to leadership, to the political formation, and some vagaries will remain. And that is not going to change in the foreseeable future. It will remain forever. At every juncture, some things will become irreversible. So I think a fair bit of what I said is largely irreversible, not all of it. So if, God forbid, if we do vote in a political formation that is not conducive to growth, then we may go through a little bit of a rough patch. But I don't think it's going to reverse India's future in a dramatic way.
My point, just to supplement, Mr. Desai spoke about fragmented agriculture as to how it is a bottleneck. I think we have fragmented political parties, regional parties, whereas US, if you see, there are two-party system. Maybe political reforms should be brought in where, what is the parameter for somebody to be recognized as a political party, an entity to be recognized as a political party to fight the elections. That has to be made more rigor. Now the current norms are not all that, conducive because we have so many diversified, there are political parties without a single elected representative also. That kind of a scenario.
One-room political parties, more than 1,000 registered with PCI.
Yeah, that's true. So that has to change. Second thing is constructive, dialogue, debate is missing in Indian political system. No, and if you are, even in television debates, if you see, any meaningful question asked to any political leader, you will not get a reply, but you will get a counter question on what they did. So one wrong is justified by another wrong. So that constructive, without animosity, because all of them are supposed to be in the field to serve the public, serve the nation. If that is the unified objective, why there is so much of animosity and so much of hatred politics? Why not there be healthy, constructive mode of deliberation? That is missing. Opposition, whoever it is, irrespective of the party, opposition party means their job is to oppose everything which the ruling party does, which again should change. Like in the olden days, the village, like you were mentioning, the designation collector, they were known as block development officers at some point in time. They misunderstood it as that their job is to block the development. Like opposition means oppose everything, even if something, I think opposition should measure up and mature enough to applaud what is good done by the ruling party. So realizing when they become ruling party, they will get the same support and reciprocity. This healthy political scenario, if it comes, I think it will augur well for India because right now, Pakistan and China need not do much to keep on pulling India down. Opposition is taking care of that, whichever party it is.
Though I may add one thing here, just sir, to counter this point. GST was not the idea of this government. It was seeded in another government and it went through the whole process. It took 10, 12 years and it got passed by political consensus. And I have asked this question to a lot of US investors because they pass critical remarks. So I said, what is the chance that in the US you can get a law like GST passed? What does GST mean? States in India have forever given up their power to tax goods and services, with the exception of tobacco, alcohol, and a few, right? Which also will go in time. And most people who are honest on the table, never will the political consensus in the US agree to something like GST. So I think while there are some frailties in our political system, there are also these, the process of consensus ultimately at the lawmaking level does work. And yes, we lose time, we probably take a little longer, but we get there. we ultimately get there. I mean, the same thing applies to 123. You know, the civil nuclear agreement was seeded in the Vajpayee government, got passed in the Manmohan Singh government, and you know, it passed through a couple of government changes and, you know, went through. So I think, you know, some of these things do work in this country.
The reality is NREGS, but the reality is it's not about political parties. Like if all of us are following the last 1 week, between the two coalitions are 64 parties, right? And how are they going to be drawing each other from which directions? God only knows. But I think it's a bigger disaster of the political economy, the way it's shaping. If states think that the kind of freebies that gets thrown into the system, which is going to take away enterprise and action together, and with 4 or 5 more major state elections going to come in, and if everybody is already following it, the kind of pressure it will put on, even if the same government comes back with the majority, the kind of promises that the manifestos have to dole out for the next elections, for a policy analyst like me, I'm worried. Because we may, this, whatever said, whatever people may criticize, I think the Prime Minister has learned the fine art of balancing short-termism with long-termism, which is very rare for any head of government anywhere in the world. Now, if we get skewed more towards short-termism, I think the long-term interest of this country is going to be at stake, and that is a bigger pressure that we all have to worry about. And the only way we can sort it out is we, all of us as citizens, recognize this and say, it's not about whom we vote for, but whoever we vote for, make the demand say that balance is short-term and long-term for this nation. We need to take care of short-term. It's a political economy. You can't run away from it. But we cannot sacrifice long-termism for that.
In the interest of time, I'll have to move towards the last ending closing question to the guest tonight. When we talk about development, we talk about the broad-based development of late, taking the whole entire 1.4 billion people along with us when we do. What are the closing comments from each of you for your dream or your one wish for how India is seen 25 years, 50 years down the line? If you were to just put it out there, we'll possibly wind with that. Goes first.
Martin Luther King, in his famous dream speech, he said, I would like to live in a country where my children will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. That is because of the racism that existed when he spoke. But a lot of development happened in such a way that even an American-born African could become the president of USA. That reform happened there. I'm not a Martin Luther King, I'm an ordinary citizen of India, but I have the right to dream for India. My dream for India, if whatever, Dr. R. Balasubramaniam and Mr. Ridham Desai, I mean, they all predicted a lot of things will happen. And as it is going to happen, my dream for India, what I wish India achieves is, one generation of India gave theosophy to humanity, another generation built monuments, another generation brought agricultural revolution, then industrial revolution, last generation service sector revolution, now digital revolution is happening. And in future, I think with all these systemic reforms, I think there will be a moral revolution that will bring about probity in public life. If that can happen, I think India will emerge stronger. And if that happens, and if this growth, like 2010, we pushed Canada to become the 9th largest GDP. In 2015, we overtook Brazil and Italy to become the 7th. 2018, we overtook France to become the 6th. And now we have overtaken UK to become the 5th. And in 2027, we overtake Germany to become the 4th. And 2029 or 30, Japan to become the 3rd. And later China, as it is US as predicted, to become the 2nd largest. By that time, I wish Indian currency, 1 rupee should be equal to $1 US. And in America, outside Indian consulate offices, Americans should stand in queue for getting visa to visit India.
The last thing may not happen because it will all be digital.
It's very difficult to top this list. but being a citizen activist, today the country is finally moving towards a citizen-centric governance. 25 years later, we should have a government-centric citizen. And that's a huge ask. I'm not going to explain it. I want all of you to reflect on it. Government is not just to be criticized or bashed about or looked to for regulation. The more empowered we are and the more understanding we are. I don't know how many people in this room even know that Parliament session started yesterday. How many of you go visit the Lok Sabha website? How many of you write to your local parliamentarian? The immediate response would be, he'll not reply. How many of us take the corporator to task when the water doesn't flow? The day we do that, we have become a government-centric citizen, and that will be India's greatest day.
I think it is almost inevitable, though not totally guaranteed, that we'll become richer materially. But I just hope and pray that along the way we don't lose our spiritual wealth, because that will be a massive loss in comparison to the material wealth that we gain. And I hope in 25 years, and maybe even earlier than that, no person in this land has to go to sleep without a meal.
A Friday evening in the year 2009, the thoughts you mentioned in your book, sir, you said, if India makes up its mind, it will make it happen. The moment of reckoning is here, looks like, from what I hear from you all. A future full of promise is a huge responsibility. All of us as corporates, as citizens, as individuals are at the cusp right now where we can make a difference. The trajectory is drawn. It's for all of us to participate. Nations' fortunes are notoriously known to ebb and flow, word balance delicate, a progress fragile. If we are going to stand in future and tell, Rhythm's going to tell his daughter, we're going to tell our children that what you're enjoying are the fruits of our work, our action. The time is now. We all have work to do to make this the richest nation of the world. It's been absolute pleasure sharing the dais and discussion with you gentlemen tonight. The evening continues. We move to the concluding sessions. Have an enjoyable evening, all of you. Thank you.
Today, the room is filled with an aura that is unfathomable otherwise. We've heard the knowledge oozing sessions, and as promised, you have more than an experience to take back with you. We shall now have the closing comments by Mr. Avinash Satwalekar, who is an MBA in Finance from the Wharton University, Pennsylvania, who is the equity fund manager in US and has also been the CEO of Franklin Templeton, Malaysia and Vietnam, and is the president of Franklin Templeton, India. This would be followed by dinner.
Thank you. I've got the unenviable job of trying to summarize the evening tonight and try to get you all out to dinner before you start to voluntarily move. So I promise to keep this absolutely short. I think we started off with Sadhguru's comment, and the one comment that I really liked was sacrifice now and enjoy later. Right? I think that is something that we're all going to have to do. And I don't know how many of you know, but Franklin Templeton is in the investments business. And as Rhythm pointed out on a regular basis, that investments require patience, which means you've got to sacrifice your income now, save it, such that you can enjoy it later for whatever it is that you want to do. So I think, Mr. Manoharan, you had, I think, one of the toughest discussion points and definitely one of the toughest roles in terms of turning around Satyam. I think corporate governance is one of those things that if we don't get right, it's going to make the rest of our journey in strengthening the capital markets that much harder. I think the one point where if we have strong corporate governance, that gives a tremendous level of confidence to investors, not just domestic, but even foreign. And I think that is critical. So spending time understanding, and actually to Dr. Bala, your approach of saying that it is not just the government's job, it is all our job to make sure that corporate governance and governance in general becomes a critical part of how we approach it. One of the other things that, Dr. Bala, you mentioned is be a lifelong learner. I find that that is something that is immensely important, especially with the next generation. Trying to constantly learn and educate only helps us going forward. And I think if we don't keep doing that and we don't instill that culture of lifelong learning, that makes our life a lot harder to achieve the vision that the gentleman laid out for us. Rhythm, your view on the economy is definitely optimistic, but very achievable. I think there are elements in our economy today that we have never seen in the past. And that's what's giving that optimism, whether it's the demographic dividend, whether it is the change with which we are approaching Make in India, whether it is the change with which we are approaching regulations. All of these are leading up to a fairly strong position for India. That has never been the case in the past. And I think where we stand today is a huge testament to what this administration has been able to do in a short period of time. I think that is very important. When I look at kind of how the mutual fund industry has evolved over the last 25, 30 years, that is an incredible participant in this growth story. When we talk about financial inclusion, mutual fund investments, we talked about equity ownership being at all-time highs. That is the average Indian participating in India's growth story. So being able to draw from that is an absolutely important thing. So when we look at mutual fund investing, not only does it provide a longer-term investment, so you sacrifice now and you reap the rewards later, but it allows you to participate. And I think one of the biggest things that the government is trying to do is inclusiveness. How do we get that inclusive growth? And that inclusive growth starts at the retail level. So I think there's a number of, initiatives that are being put forth not only by the government but by industry as well that will help us get there. So I won't take up any more time other than I'll just close with this saying that patience is needed for true long-term wealth creation, and maybe to steal Rhythm's line, including spiritual wealth. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the night.
Thank you so much. Before I let you all go, we'll quickly have the felicitation ceremony. I request Mr. Robin Singh, renowned cricketer and world-class fielder, to kindly give a small token of our love to Rhythm Desai. So I request you to please come on stage. Thank you. I now request Mr. Lakshmi Narayanan sir to kindly give a small token of our appreciation to Dr. Balu. And lastly, I kindly request Avinash Satwalekar to kindly do the honors to T.N. Manoharan sir. Thank you all for being such a wonderful audience. Good night, and please proceed for dinner. Thank you.